This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Morning. It's 4 minutes after 10. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where there's quite a lot to get through today, and we will do our best to do so. I'm going to begin. Well, have you noticed a couple of... We should keep a list, shouldn't we? I'm getting obsessed with lists. I'm turning into Father Christmas. I kind of find myself increasingly drawn to subjects, like with a sense of curiosity. I really want to unravel it. I don't know if you've noticed that I've developed a borderline obsession with the 9.4 million people in this country of working age who are economically inactive. And economically inactive means neither working nor looking for work in the last 4 weeks. That's the most recent definition I could find, which went to the 2021 census. Now, if you're new to this programme, and if you have some slightly cliched views of what radio phone-ins are about, then I should tell you that my immediate impulse when presented with a statistic like that is to feel sympathy for these people, to work upon the presumption that nobody wants to live a life of inactivity or well, not quite nobody, but the tiny minority of people who perhaps genuinely prefer a life of indolence, inactivity and relative poverty, have nothing but sympathy from me, because the massive majority of that number will obviously be hostage to their health. And I know that, you know, in the sort of world that Rupert Murdoch built, you're supposed to go swinging after anybody with any difficulties or vulnerabilities, or anybody who they're all swinging their leg, whatever it may be. I just want you to know that this conversation begins from a point of empathy, I suppose, but also confusion. That is the point. So there are two stories in 2 days, one which we didn't mention yesterday and one which is on the front page of one newspaper today. Weight loss jabs will get Britain working. And this directly addresses this constituency of people, which is just shy of 10 million, who can be described as economically inactive. Now, some of them are going to be in sort of part-time education. Some of you, so there will be all manner of reasons why you might have ended up in that category, but the figure is extraordinary, and it's gone up by more than 50% in 5 years, or at least the latest forecasts suggest that it will go up by 50% in the next 5 years. That's long-term sick leave, so that won't necessarily describe everybody who is economically inactive. And then the second story, which was in yesterday's newspapers, was the, I think I did mention it to you in passing, discounted driving lessons to the unemployed will be offered by care providers. Care providers are struggling to find staff. Don't mention Brexit. Care providers are struggling to find staff, and therefore, as a sort of as a tempter, if you like, as an inducement, they are offering discounted driving lessons to unemployed people as part of a plan to tackle the worklessness crisis. So training for those out of work, incentives including subsidised insurance, e-bike schemes, to help new recruits, or to encourage new recruits to plug the growing gap in the workforce. Now, I just can't get my head around this. This is what, the fourth or fifth time that I've sort of found myself dancing around this demographic, dancing around this topic. Part of the problem is that there will be millions of different answers to the central question of why are you economically inactive? Why is that person over there economically inactive? I think long COVID is hugely underreported and underappreciated in this country. Long-term health conditions that leave you unable to do some jobs, and you're not getting the support you need to either improve your health because of waiting lists. I mean, austerity is going to be a huge part of many of the problems that we're talking about. But again, it's not going to be all of them. Not being able to drive. How big a deal is not being able to drive? I just don't know. And yet, I've got this sense that if you could just fix this, then you would have a jackpot moment in politics. If you could just fix this, how many of the 9.4 million would you need to get to work to fill all of the vacancies in the country? I mean, a relatively low percentage of them. it's a fascinating one, isn't it? It really is. So, what's the best way into it today? There's a part of me that is looking at the news about weight loss jabs, the idea that you can have a jab, lose the weight, go to work, and thinking, my Catholic upbringing is beginning to kick in on this. I don't know how much you know about Catholicism, but it's quite a, what's the word that I'm looking for? It rejects the notion of easy options. You know, if you sin, you've got to go and tell the priest, and the priest will make you do 10 Hail Marys or walk to Lourdes on your knees or something. I mean, you do penance. It's a religion in which penance plays a very big part. There's a lot of guilt and a lot of penance. So you might feel guilt about, for example, gluttony, which is one of the 7 deadly sins. You're supposed to feel guilty. So you could even say in confession, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. It has been God knows how long since my last confession." I mean, literally, God does know how long since my last confession. And these are my sins. You start with the usual, although that'll be a lot shorter than it was during adolescence. And then you move on to and then you start scrabbling around for things. I don't know how many Catholics suffered from what I suffered from as a younger man, which was I didn't feel I'd sinned enough. I felt I was wasting the priest's time. Did you do this? You think you'd sit there, you'd sort of come up, well, I've been impure in thought and deed. I've been mean to my sister. I stole some biscuits. I hadn't stolen any biscuits. I just felt that if you look at the little form that you have in the confessional, leaves quite a big space for when you're supposed to insert your sins. And I used to feel a bit inadequate. I used to feel I hadn't sinned enough. And then, of course, being a Catholic, you'd start worrying about the fact that you'd told a lie in confession in order to excuse yourself from the feeling of having wasted the priest's time. Poor old priest. Remember, everyone in my class had to go to confession. You've got 30 10-year-old boys all queuing up to go to confession. The chances are that we all said more or less exactly the same thing. It's a miracle the fella stayed awake. Should have thrown something into the mix to really, I've murdered someone, to really just sort of wake the fella up. But you've got that sense of... So I don't know whether it's the way I was raised, is that rewards are supposed to be a consequence of effort. Do you see what I mean? I'm not entirely sure why I just took you to my teenage confessional either, but I feel it has a certain pertinence. But the idea that A, if something is too good to be true, it probably is, and B, there's no such thing as a free lunch, or indeed a free anti-lunch or non-lunch or weight loss. So all of the medicine appears to suggest that the 3,000 obese patients who are going to be recruited for a 5-year study will not suffer any extra negatives from having these weight loss jabs, and most of them will benefit from it. My Catholic, I don't want to say soul, but my Catholic sensibilities, Catholic big C sensibilities, just feel it won't work because you haven't put any effort into it. Do you know what I mean? You do, don't you? You don't. I don't think you have to be a Catholic. My apologies to Matt, who says you're making me feel dirty. But luckily, Rosemary makes up for it, who's been in touch to say I'm in hysterics here. That is oh so true about confession. No, it's big C, because I'm talking about my religious upbringing. I'm talking about the way the monks and the nuns made me feel. It was like if you feel guilty if you do something wrong, and you're supposed to have a effort before reward. So I don't know. I can't do a phone in now after that, can I? And just say, do you know what I'm talking about? 0345 606 0973. So I don't think today is a day to dig back into this mystery of the 9 million economically inactive. But all right, I'll say it. I just don't think it's going to work. And I think that my reasons for thinking it's not going to work are a bit daft. You can't base an opinion on a medicine on things that were inculcated into you by priests when you were 11 years old, but I can't help it. I just don't think it's going to work. I think if you want to lose weight, there are no miracles. And I worry that the government is staking so much on this. So much. essentially trying to do two things, trying to plug the holes in the workforce. And I think they're also trying to, and I could be wrong about this, but I think they're also trying to muffle some of the immigration rhetoric that all the bad actors responsible for almost all of the bad things that have happened to this country in the last 14 or so years are responsible for. You try and muffle the immigration conversation by getting people who are already here into work, and you do that by waving a magic wand and somehow turning people who are currently unfit for work into people who are fit for work. So I suppose we need to do the what of it before we do the metaphysics. And the what of it is, if you could lose a ton of weight tomorrow, would you be in work by Monday? 0345 6060 973. And you know this is a place of enormous sympathy for the morbidly obese or for the people who have... someone once said to me many years ago when I used to indulge in some fairly unpleasant bullying of overweight people on this programme, and somebody once said to me, would you ever talk to somebody with an eating disorder that rendered them very, very thin? Would you ever talk to them like that? And I said, no, of course I wouldn't. That would be disgusting. So they said, so why do you talk to people whose eating disorder has led them in the opposite direction? And that whole eat less, exercise more, pull your socks up, a little bit of self-control, sure, it may well apply to some people, but to use it as a sledgehammer with which to smash up everybody who struggles with their weight is both obnoxious and offensive. So be absolutely assured that that is not anything close to what happens here. But I can't shake this feeling that it's too good to be true. I don't need to overthink it. That's the phrase I'm looking for. I can't shake this feeling that it's too good to be true. And I'm not sure who's qualified to answer that question, except for people who have done it already, been on these drugs already, and can describe life-changing consequences, life-changing results with precious little negativity. It's possible that the government is going to succeed in waving a magic wand and delivering enough improvement to enough lives to make a measurable difference to the jobs market. But I don't know. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. All right. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. So is it... So you're giving obese patients drugs, and this will stop them, I don't like Wes Streeting's language, holding back the economy. So if you're overweight and you're not working, you're holding back the economy. You could probably make a case for saying that this is technically true. Here are some obesity drugs. Off you go. Fill your boots, or not, or whatever the opposite. Empty your boots, I suppose. A simple question, is it going to work? Or do you, like me, feel that this is all a little bit too good to be true? So you can do the overview like I've done. You can do the specific examples, as in you've been through it. It can be your own case study. You can tell me about other case studies. You can posit as a potential beneficiary of this on whether this would actually be the life-changing intervention that you have so far been denied. And if there's time, and there might not be, but towards perhaps a little later in the hour, I am interested in what it's like to not be able to... I don't think anyone ever asks you that. People might ask you about your illness. People might ask you about your condition. But the relationship between a human and their work... I nearly said a man and their work, which would have been echoes of yesterday's conversation, wouldn't it, about Superwoman. But the relationship between a human being and work is, I think, quite complicated, and if you are denied that relationship, I imagine that it takes you to places that the rest of us would find quite difficult to understand. 18 minutes after 10 is the time. Weight loss jabs will get Britain working, says Wes Streeting. Will they? Will they really? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 10 is the time. Weight loss jabs will get Britain working. I mean, fantastic. Is it too good to be true? I possibly, although I am struck this morning by how many people made up sins in confession. If you think about it, that's the worst imaginable thing you can do in confession. To lie to the priest, and therefore to God, about sins that you haven't actually committed. But it turns out I'm far from alone. We may return to this territory at a later date, but I don't want to get distracted now. Dominic is in Detroit, in Michigan. Dominic, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James. How are you?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
I don't know. I just want to share a personal story about weight loss because as someone who I used to weigh about 400 pounds at my heaviest.
Right.
I don't know what that is in kilograms. I know you guys use kgs in the UK, I think. And
Mate, we don't actually. We generally use stones, but I don't even. How many pounds are there in a stone?
I don't know. I actually don't know.
We're
but
both
anyways,
as stupid as each other. This is a ridiculous conversation. Go on. 14 pounds in a stone. So you were 400 pounds. Okay. What's 400 divided by 14, Dominic?
I'm an English professor, not a math teacher.
But you've got to be able to do 400 divided by 14. So, Keith, what's 400 divided by... Come on. Anyway, carry on, Dominic. Someone will text me the answer to that in a minute.
I was about 400 pounds at my heaviest, and I lost 150 pounds through just hard work.
That's nearly 11 stone you lost. Yeah. Nearly 11 stone. Wow.
Yeah. And, I've kept the weight off for about 8 years, and as someone who has gone through that process, even though I'm thinner and healthier than I was before, it's still a struggle in the sense that, you never really lose the kind of mindset that you had when you were obese. And so there'll be moments, my friends always joke, if we go out to dinner and I order a lot of food, they'll be like, oh, it's Big Dom again. He's back.
He's having a relapse.
So Yeah. The mindset never goes away. And my concern is that the weight loss jab or the shot, in America, we have pills and shots. It doesn't take away the mindset. And then, if anything, I think it cheapens it by making it seem like it's easy to lose weight.
Yeah.
And you have to solve, the root problem is the mindset that gets you into being obese. And I think the medication doesn't change that.
And I mean, we don't know yet whether this scheme that is being introduced by the health secretary would involve the sort of counselling and support alongside the drug, but I mean, you certainly can't see the one working without the other. I presume, as an English professor, that your weight when you were at your largest didn't limit you from doing your job.
I actually was not a professor when I was overweight. It was part of my losing weight was to be a kind of good role model for my students. So I lost it all right before I started teaching. But I also want to say, too, at least in America, weight is a socioeconomic issue. I don't know if it's the same in England, but I mean, I'm from Detroit, Michigan, which is labeled colloquially as like a food desert, which means that there's no kind of access to good quality food for most of the people that live in the city. And so in America, it costs more to be healthy. And so the jabs also don't address the kind of economic issues that force people into obesity as well.
That's a really good point. We touched on that yesterday, actually, particularly with regard to road service stations and the food variety that you get in continental Europe compared to what you get in the UK. So is it? I mean, for you briefly, do the negatives that you've listed outweigh any potential positives straight off from the starting blocks?
Yeah, I mean, the only positive I can think of is that you get a kind of adrenaline rush of losing weight and being like, yes, absolutely, I feel better. But I think that's kind of like that'll wear off eventually. And so for me, the negatives outweigh the positives. Whatever the kind of short-term weight loss success you may have, it's going to be a struggle that doesn't go away. And unless this medication addresses that, you're just going to be back in the same position that you were. Yeah,
so a lot of kind of a lot of middle-aged men and women, largely middle class, who wanted to lose a spare tire from around the middle is very different from making such a profound intervention that it takes someone from unemployed, morbidly obese to employed, healthy and ready for work, because there'll be so much else going on. Just for future reference, you weighed about 28.5 stone, and you lost.
That's wild.
And you lost under a third of that. Just under a third of that. So there you go. A maths lesson for you, Professor. I
appreciate it.
What are you teaching today? Have you got anything on the schedule today?
Tomorrow in class we are doing rhetorical analysis, so ethos, pathos, logos, persuasion, and the American election provides no shortage of campaign ads and argumentative topics to discuss.
Hey, I've got one for you actually. Have we got that clip? Have we got that clip of the American thing? Okay, have a listen to this, because you might be able to use this, and I'll double check who it is that's talking. Let me tell you now who it is that's talking, because this is actually quite significant. By the standards of rhetorical analysis, I don't know how you deal with this. I don't know how we deal with it, but this is the Glenn Youngkin, talking to Jake Tapper. Have you heard it?
CNN yesterday night.
Check this out, seriously.
He was talking about sick people, radical left lunatics who should be handled by the National Guard or the military. And then later on in that same speech, he said that one of the lunatics he addressed was Congressman Adam Schiff. That's who he was talking about using the National Guard and military against, radical left lunatics, enemy from within, people like Adam Schiff.
Again, Jake, I don't think that and again, I can't.
I'm just reading
I can't
his
speak
quotes
for him, but I do think that you are misinterpreting and misrepresenting his thoughts. I do believe, again, it's all around the fact that we have had an unprecedented number of illegal immigrants come over the border in an unconstrained, unrestrained fashion. The Biden-Harris administration has allowed it to happen. It was their policies. They did not fix it. And as a result, we do see a substantial number of folks who are violent criminals, folks who have been identified as national security threats here. And in fact, just 2 weeks ago, we in fact had senior people from our national security apparatus say that there's 15,000 violent felons in the United States. They have no idea where they are. That is what I believe the president is referring to. I don't think that he's referring to elected people in America. But I'm
literally reading his quotes. I'm literally reading his quotes to you. And I played them earlier so you could hear that they were not made up by me. He's literally talking about, quote, radical left lunatics. And then one of those lunatics he mentioned was Congressman Adam Schiff.
So that's Orwell, isn't it? That's denying the evidence of your eyes and ears. That's the governor of Virginia being read quotes and then saying that he heard something else. How do you teach that?
I mean, real quick, an interesting thing about Glenn Youngkin is when he won in 2021, he was hailed as like a new kind of Republican that could counter Trump, which short-lived. I mean, you can't really teach that other than the fact by saying that, like, it's just nonsense. And it's weird because these Trump people say that they love Trump because he speaks his mind. Yeah. And then when he speaks his mind, they say, well,
he didn't mean that.
He wasn't actually speaking his mind. He didn't mean it. It's like this circle. I don't know. You're right. It is Orwell. Up is down. Freedom is slavery. War is peace. Ignorance is knowledge. Like,
there you go. Your students will benefit from that heads up, I hope. Dominic, thank you. He wasn't expecting that. A maths professor in Detroit rings a radio station in London to talk about weight loss drugs and ends up analysing or providing rhetorical analysis of an interview given by the governor of Virginia to a journalist on CNN, an English professor, rings in to do that, and then we end up here. That's why I love my job. You never know what's going to happen next. And by an extraordinary coincidence, we had that little clip ready to play out a little later in the programme. Here's Jenny Barsby with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:32. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. They're betting a lot on it. They are persuaded, and some of the language is extraordinary. Talk about a monumental impact on obesity and getting Britain working. You cannot extrapolate data from an anecdote, and one experience does not prove or disprove a broader theory. And I am conscious of the fact that my sort of youthful Catholicism has given me an unhealthy idea of the relationship between suffering and deservingness. You know, the idea that if you're unhealthy, you teach this. This is why Glenn Hoddle got into trouble. Religion kind of creates in the minds of people the idea that you are being punished, if not for past sins, then for present sins. And I hate that. I know that's not true, but it's there somewhere inside our society, inside all Judeo-Christian societies, which is why we struggle with the idea of miracle cures being a thing. But maybe this is the kind of promised land. Maybe, and if you've had these weight loss jabs, I'd love to talk to you if you have moved from being unable to work because of your weight, because of the impact it was having on your joints or the impact it was having on your diabetes or your respiratory conditions, and you've lost the weight and you're back in work. Because if there are enough of you, then this could actually be so. I don't know as a journalist how to cover stuff like this. Cover stuff that is positive and sensible and delivers optimism. But if it does all of those things, then we need to be talking about it. Wes is in Brighton, not that one, not that Wes, the other Wes. Wes, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah. So a bit of background. I'm a gym owner in Brighton,
okay,
and I see all different types of people, all different shapes and sizes, and so I think that this drug will really help a group of people, but I'll talk about a wider problem that's not just with people that are obese or extremely heavy or have problems with their weight, and presents itself, I think, culturally, maybe in Britain itself, but I think we have people that come in and say that I really need to lose weight, I'm really struggling, I can't breathe, those sorts of things. And actually, when we get to meet them, they are almost too heavy for the machines themselves to do any exercise. Yeah. So a lot of the time, we have to say you're going to have to just get out and walk. We're going to have to get you to this target weight. This drug for them.
How do they end up with you? How do they end up with you? Because that speaks of a mental desire to improve the situation, which seems to me to be a large part of the battle, just getting to that first base.
I mean, the running joke I have with people that arrive and they sort of come in and say, "Oh God, I made it." I said, "Well, 90% of the work's done. You've arrived."
Yes, yes.
and a lot of the time, the thing is, we're a private limited company, private gym, and the leisure centres are a lot of the time full because the doctors can give leisure centre vouchers for people to go and use it there.
I didn't know that.
So we get that sort of thing where the doctors will say you can have some vouchers for the gym. It's free to go. So we get a lot of people that come from there, or it's just quite close to them, or they've tried. And a lot of the time people said, I've been trying to get it for 6 months, and I just haven't had the energy to do it, or haven't had the time, or that sort of thing. And something usually changes. A lot of the time it's family that step in and say, look, you just need to try the gym and that sort of thing. And the older guys you've got to you've just got to eat less and move more. Yeah. Which, by the way, doesn't. It works, but it doesn't work.
I know exactly what you mean by that. I do.
And then coming on to the effect. So a lot of people we find that in a different situation will say, look, I need some personal training because I really struggle with my exercise, I can't get motivated. I'll do 12 weeks personal training, so 12 sessions, whatever it is, and I'll come to the gym to get to my target. They hit their target, whether it's getting married or whatever, so they hit that target, and then we don't see them again for 6 months, and then we see them 6 months later and they're heavier than ever because they've hit. And it's that sort of thing where people say, oh, great, I'll just do this for 12 weeks, this would be great. I said, no, mate, this is every day for the rest of your life. And it's that mentality that actually yes, you might work a bit harder to lose a bit of weight initially, but you've got to keep doing this. Yes. And you don't necessarily have to do it in a gym. You can go out, you can do walking and running, or whatever other people like to do, swimming, like anything like that. You don't have to do it in a gym. But the shift change is, and I think there's a couple of complications having seen people on these drugs, is that, there's actually loads of side effects, so liver damage, kidney damage, all of that. But they say, well, actually, the damage of them far outweighs the damage done to your body if you're obese. Yes. So I get that. But there's also
And that's not going to be for everybody. I mean, there are enormous health warnings on your paracetamol inside if you actually unwrap that enormous leaflet and read through it. So it was something people failed to understand when we were talking about vaccines during lockdowns. So this big one, tirzepatide, 21% of their body weight. Patients lost an average of 21% of their body weight in 36 weeks, and it costs £120 a month. So
the only danger is
you're saying it's not going to work on everybody, but it's going to work on enough people to make a meaningful difference to the area that Wes Streeting, what your namesake wants to make a meaningful difference to.
You are going to have another side effect off the back of that, which we do see even with people that suddenly stop eating loads and start exercising. Yeah. There'll be another physical aspect, which is a lot of excess skin that comes with that. So the surgery required. So we do see people that then go on to need surgery to correct that, because that becomes another physical barrier for them. So there's loads of other things as well.
No, you're right, and they need to be aware. So that's why, I mean, the more we talk about it, the less it sounds like a miracle cure, actually. The more it sounds like a potentially brilliant thing, but with loads and loads of other, it's not a magic wand, there's loads of other stuff that would have to go on as well. Wes, how often do you come across people who are too overweight to work?
Well, a lot of the time they don't reach us, but we do. A lot of the time, it's hard to say, really.
Yeah, I thought it might be.
I would say not that often.
Because they need to come from the doctor, wouldn't they, really? And then it'd be hard enough to get to you. So that's why the injections, it may be the other way around. The injections may be, for some of the people being targeted by this, the injections will be the starting point. And then as the weight comes off, they can start doing the other stuff.
There's the mental aspect as well, though, James. I think the issue is that there's been people in the past that I've seen that have come back for more and more personal training, and I said, we cannot take any more of their money, and their problem isn't a physical one. Their problem mental health, and it's that. But I'm not qualified enough to say I think you need to go and speak to someone about this. But that it's nothing they do physically is going to help, and they need to
except that there is a mental element to this, because your body is telling your brain that you're not hungry anymore, and some people will probably be able to override that impulse somehow. But for a huge number of people, that's why we're back to the idea of them staking so much on it, because they honestly believe it will do a lot of the things that they're hoping it will do. But that was very helpful. Very helpful indeed. You sound like a very responsible gym owner. Do you want to give the gym a shout, Wes, or are you more than happy with business as it stands?
Oh, no, it's Adapt Fitness in Hove, and we'll always have more members.
It's what fitness?
So yes, please. Adapt Fitness.
Adapt Fitness in Hove. I went to Hove once, Wes.
Oh, yeah.
I got thrown out of reception in a hotel for coming downstairs in my slippers.
Rightfully so, James. It depends what slippers they were.
You make a very good point. But they delivered my breakfast in bed without any brown sauce. So I went downstairs to get my brown sauce. I can't eat breakfast in bed without brown sauce. And it was like a Basil Fawlty moment. I've never forgotten that. Anyway, thank you. Chloe's in Middlesbrough, where I've never been thrown out of a hotel reception area for wearing slippers. Chloe, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hello. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
I just want to follow up from what Wes was saying there, that I agree that it's not necessarily a miracle drug that will work for everyone. I think it depends on your starting point, but you will have to make those changes to your lifestyle. And I can only speak for myself based on my experience of being on the drug.
Right.
But the efforts I've had to go to sort of micromanage what I'm eating, my calories, and going to the gym 3 times a week. It's a tool, but I don't think if I'd have sat at home and eaten the same things I'd maybe been eating before, it would have worked in the same way that to get the results I've got now. So I think it's about making the changes at the point when you start,
and wanting
and are people going to be prepared?
I start from the belief that everybody would want to improve their situation, but that's the easy bit. The hard bit is then doing the stuff that needs to be done to address it.
I think there needs to be a package of support around that person.
That's a great
to
phrase.
Encourage and have those role models who are going to influence them to make those right decisions. If it's completely new, if they have not really tried to, look at their nutrition, their diet, their moving the body as much, just having the pen is not going to make the big difference. But I think it's making sure that there's a team of people to support those sort of positive things that will happen once you change your lifestyle.
What percentage of the entire NHS budget do you think is spent on preventable health conditions, almost all of which could be linked to excess weight? Go on, have a guess.
Well, it affects a lot of things, isn't it? Possibly 60, 70%.
Well, it's 40. It's 40 at the moment, but it could rise to 60% by 2040 if we don't start doing things like this. It's a big figure. That
I can understand that, because weight's been a sort of battle from in my early teens to I'm now at 30. I was offered weight loss surgery in 2018, but at that time I declined it because I wanted to start my new job and I'd put work first and lost weight in lockdown. So I think there's some people who will put off maybe making those drastic changes because they work a lot as well. There's the other side of it where they're just so maybe throw themselves into their profession and it's a passion that they don't make time for themselves. Whereas this drug doesn't feel as life-changing perhaps as like a surgery. It's something that you can sort of administer at home yourself under the guidance of a medical professional, whereas the surgery was more of a drastic change that I wasn't ready to make. So I think for people who've struggled long-term with weight, this is a new sort of less invasive option, but you will have to make those changes to be successful.
And what that means, we've got no way of knowing what kind of chunk it's going to take out of the overall number of people, because you obviously were not prevented from working because you decided to prioritise a new job over the weight loss. So how do we get a number on people? I've got this figure of 9.4 million economically inactive. How many of that is due to weight, due to excess weight? We just don't know, do we?
No, we don't. But I think if I think about my weight being an issue as a teenager, I definitely think it did pigeonhole me into certain professions, and it does affect your
your horizons, your options, your choices, your sense of self and what you can do and where you can be going. Gosh, that's a brilliant point. Thank you. And good luck with it. Sounds like everything's moving in the right direction. Thank you, Chloe. I should clarify, I wasn't only wearing slippers when I walked into the hotel reception in Hove. I was wearing, I'd put my clothes on. I put my trousers and a shirt on. And I went downstairs in my slippers. And the manager of the hotel threw me out of reception for wearing slippers. You can't wear slippers in the public areas. So some of you are a bit surprised I take slippers when I go away. I was going to Hove. It's like it's where old people go to meet other old people. I presumed that everyone would be wearing slippers in Hove. I just wanted to blend in. But I definitely wasn't wearing only slippers. Otherwise, it would be perfectly reasonable to throw me out of reception.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:48. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the question of whether or not this is too good to be true is currently nudging towards no, it's not too good to be true, but don't think that it is a self-contained miracle. These jabs, these new drugs that reduce weight exponentially must be seen in the context of a broader package. But actually, maybe a rare moment for genuine optimism, I think. Daff is in Bristol. Daff, what would you like to say?
Hi, James, a long-time listener, and I'm glad to speak to you today. I'm a little bit nervous, but I know it's only you. So thanks
it is indeed only me, Daff, so you take your time. Take all the time you need.
Thanks very much. I'm an obesity specialist dietitian. I now work in the independent sector, but I've worked with the NHS for over 10 years within the field of obesity, and worked with these types of injectable medications for many years. As you know, they've been around to treat other diseases like type 2 diabetes in the past.
Yes.
Worked within research settings and now on a wider scale with individuals that are using it for obesity alone. And I think the first thing I'll say is I agree with the PT, the personal trainer that you had on recently. It's more than just eating less and moving more. This isn't a disease. Obesity is a disease, and there are many research papers to define this as a disease, and that's the way we should be reframing our thoughts around how to treat a disease like any other condition. So if you had any other types of conditions, this is how we should be framing the treatment of this.
Do you know, socially, Daff, I think that part of the reason why we struggle with that, probably, even though it sounded like I'd gone a little bit madder than usual, it's probably linked to the religion stuff that I was touching on earlier in the programme. The idea that you need to be you need to deny yourself pleasure. You need to be penitent. You need to do, and therefore, if you're not, there is something wrong with you morally. So if you're overweight, there's something wrong with you morally, which opens the door to all the lazy right-wing tabloid abuse of people who are overweight. In fact, as soon as you acknowledge it's a disease, the whole conversation should change, and sadly doesn't always, but looks like it might be doing so slowly.
I think we see across every facet of life in relation to this is just stigma and prejudice.
Yes.
In why we frame it like this, rather than seeing it as a condition, as a disease that needs treatment, and reframing it like that will allow policy, will allow funding to look at elements like you've already alluded to in your show in relation to economic inactivity and how we get people back to work.
Yes, so it works. I mean, in the simplest sense, it does what it says on the box. It needs a package, as it were. It needs a bit of broader support, which is why people like you exist. My worry now is that there aren't enough people like you. Correct.
We know that. We know there's a shortage within the central NHS service, and in the independent sector there are many individuals out there giving this drug out without any what we call multidisciplinary team care.
Yes. Well, that's not what this scheme is going to do. I mean, this looks at it's a 3,000 patient pilot that they'll be doing the 5-year study, looking at the medication, looking at the support structure, bringing people back into the workplace. So, and Wes Streeting says the injection should not be seen as an alternative to overhauling unhealthy lifestyles, but suggests they could have a key role in tackling the worklessness crisis. How many people come through your doors who are economically inactive as a consequence of their weight?
So I've got a background in bariatric surgery as well, and there's a lot more in that cohort than within the medications and the once-weekly injectables. But we're starting to see more people that are economically inactive due to their obesity and living with a heavier weight. And now there is an option, which I'm very excited about. There's an option that is not surgical, that of course has a recovery time to it, that's a little more to it than the once weekly injections, that gives people options. You know, we haven't had these options in the past. Medicated approaches in the past to treat obesity haven't been effective in the past. Now they are.
And you're private for a reason, because most of the people that are doing these treatments at the moment are doing so privately, aren't they?
Well, that's not the reason why I went private.
No, I'm sorry. I know it's not the reason why you went private, but the reason why this is news, despite the fact that Mounjaro and a lot of people are already doing it, is because for the NHS to go all in on it is a big change.
Yeah, correct. And unfortunately, there is still quite a lot of red tape within the NHS to prescribe these medications, and the services that are designed to prescribe these under NICE criteria, what we call specialist weight management service. I used to work with one locally that unfortunately is bursting at the seams, and unfortunately they're unable to take on any new clients, new patients.
Well, this is that. I mean, you've led us away from. I mean, it's a much more complicated issue than a lot of the headlines allow. But if given that we're addressing a worklessness crisis, almost all of the answers to the worklessness crisis that I see involve finding more workers to provide the measures that are going to reduce the worklessness crisis. And this is another one, isn't it? If we need more people like you, we'll need more people in the NHS. We'll need more obesity experts. We'll need more nurses. We'll need people to help with the sort of holistic package, not just with the administration of the injection. And yet we're reporting on a worklessness crisis. So it ain't simple. But I don't think we've heard enough today to have our optimism removed, possibly tempered slightly. But Daph knows what he's talking about, and that relationship between economic activity and obesity is real. We're just not quite sure of two things: how real it is, how big it is, and how easy it will be to make somebody economically active by dialing down their obesity. Bonnie's in Wallington in Surrey. Bonnie, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I think that there's a common theme coming in here, obviously, in terms of the fact that it's not a miracle drug that's going to cure somebody's mental health. And I think obesity and being, not being able to stop eating is not really the act. It's just the mental health.
But if you stop feeling hungry, it's going to, even if you're not getting the support you need for your mental health, it's going to be better than not doing it, isn't it?
Okay, I'll tell you a little anecdote.
Okay.
My partner, he got Mounjaro through a private clinician.
Yes.
And he isn't hugely obese. However, he needs to lose some weight.
Okay.
And he stopped taking it because he didn't like not being able to eat.
Yeah.
And that's
and you think that's his mental health rather than.
Yeah, I think that if you are that kind of conditioned throughout many, many years of your life, if you're not doing it's like a repetitive.
Or it's comfort. Are we talking about comfort eating? I mean, he gets that fix of endorphin when he eats a lot, and he couldn't live without it.
Yeah, and I worry that the fact that the kind of government are stretched. Obviously, there's a huge black hole in the finances, and I think that this isn't a miracle cure, and the fact that social care is so stretched at the moment, unless it's, as you say, that package of support, I worry that...
I suppose there's 2 points here. There's your point, which is clearly true, but there's also the point that no one's saying it's going to help everybody, and people like your partner might be the ones that, as it were, slip through the net, and yet that's not a reason to get rid of the net. It's just a reason to have another net below this net, which will help catch people like him. What's he doing now? Is he back to where he was before?
Yes.
He is. No, I just mean in terms of his habits and his eating, and I understand that, actually. If food is a big part of your sort of emotional palate, if it is one of the things that brings you pleasure, even as you know. We talked yesterday about delicious but disgusting, and that whole mad relationship that we have is not something that can be easily rectified. It's 10:57. Thank you, Bonnie. From Wallington to the Wirral. Sally's there. Sally, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Sally.
I'm also on Manjaro, but I went on mine for different reasons. I was overweight. I was BMI 33, so I wasn't massively overweight.
Wouldn't have kept you out of work, would it? It wouldn't have made you economically inactive.
No, but I had a knee replacement operation and it had gone wrong.
Oh,
and I needed to have it redone, and the specialist said, you need to lose weight. And I've always had problems with yo-yo dieting, and I heard about this and I thought, I've got to give it a chance, because this operation is going to give me 10 years of walking, which I can't do at the moment.
Yes.
And I went on it, and it's fabulous. It does work, but I don't want people to think it's just that all they have to do is inject themselves once a week and it magically disappears.
No.
Because it's not. You've got to work at it. You have to put in the effort as well. I think people who have got willpower think it's a real cheat because it helps you lose weight. But it's not. You do still have to put the effort in. But it's so worth it when you do. That's
a beautiful testimony. And of course, it plays into the thing I said at the very outset, which is my profound belief that people who are unable to work because of their weight problems are miserable. They would really much rather be able to work. This is just like a massive help to them. It's not a magic wand. It just gives them encouragement. It almost makes doing the work you're describing worthwhile if you can see the results more easily and more quickly.
Well, but yes, in my case, because I'm a bus driver. And
are you?
I was having to take, yes, I am. I was having to take more and more time off work because although the buses are automatic and it's my left knee, you have to sit at an angle the whole time, and you don't get a chance to move your leg, and it was just seizing up all the time.
Oh, dear. That's no fun.
No, it really was a big problem for me for a year. And
are you all right now? Is it all sorted now?
I'm 6 weeks post-operation today, so I'm well on my way to recovery.
And you're doing all your physio and what have you?
Oh, yes.
When are you back on the bus?
Hopefully in about 4 weeks' time.
Well, good luck, Sally. Double-decker or single-decker?
Both. And a
really?
coach as well.
What do you prefer?
Double-deckers.
I can see why. Wait there a minute. Don't go away. Promise?
Yes, I promise.
All right. Raymond's in Hackney. Raymond, you're not a bus driver, are you?
No, I'm not. No.
Oh, flipping it. I thought I was going to be able to do that joke about waiting ages for one bus driver to come along and then two come along at once. Raymond, I haven't got time to talk to you either. I promise I'll make room for you next time you ring in. Sally, you take care. I wish you a complete and speedy recovery.
Thank you, James.
God bless. It's 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC.
After 11 is the time. There's another thing that I'm struggling to map properly, or we're struggling to map. I'm not going to take all the blame. You can ring in and help me. So there's 9.4 million people who are economically inactive that we were talking about in the last hour. I mean, to be absolutely clear, we're not talking about people who are too big to go to work. We're mostly talking about people who've got diabetes or heart disease or conditions that mean they can't go to work. So it's as much about prevention as cure. If you can get the overweight people's weight down, then they become measurably less likely to get all of the conditions that would later prevent them from going to work. So it's almost about addressing the forecast as much as it is about addressing the current statistic. But of all the subjects that we need a new roadmap for, I think that Brexit is one of the biggest. It's in the news today for a number of reasons. But before I tell you about the more recent reasons, let me take you back to July and share with you something you may have missed. So Alex Younger is a former head of MI6. Okay? I'll say that again. A former head of MI6. He was speaking to ITV News back in July.
Particularly since I've left office and I've travelled around Europe, I'm profoundly depressed. Nobody mentions the UK. We've just made ourselves irrelevant, and this is extraordinary. You know, the beginning part of this century, we were the dominant force. France has effectively eclipsed that, and you just don't hear a discussion of us. And I think Brexit has marginalised us. It was kind of intended to do exactly that. And as I've already said, I think the problem with that, and we've got NATO, and NATO is great. But conflict is about so much more than war now. It's in the economic and tech space and the digital and data, and that's all civilian, and we've just marginalised ourselves. So Putin will have been absolutely delighted by our decision, as will have Xi Jinping. When Xi looks now at Europe, he's intent on peeling it away from the United States. This is an absolutely key strategic objective for a whole set of reasons we could discuss.
Former head of MI6 there. And of course, Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage still sort of getting rich and richer, I don't know what the word would be, off the back of pretending that it was a good idea. Former head of MI6 describing the destabilisation that was the deliberate intention of Brexit. And of course, because Boris Johnson was Prime Minister when the dust began to settle, we never really got to the bottom of just how widespread Russian interference in that entire process may have been. So that's one contribution. Have a little listen to David Ricks, who's the CEO of Eli Lilly. Funnily enough, it's the pharmaceutical company that's going to be involved in the weight loss jabs that we were talking about in the last hour. This is him giving an interview on Radio 4 yesterday.
I think the difference in the UK is, on your own now, separate from Europe, it's a relatively small market. For most multinationals and certainly for Americans. So something needs to be quite different to make it interesting.
What I think he means by that, what I'm fairly sure he means by that, is that the government's going to have to bend over a little bit further to get businesses like his to do business here than it would have done if we were offering access to a market of 450 million people as opposed to access to a market of 50 million people. And again, these are refrains that we shared so often on this program that we began to be able to do it in our sleep. They do not need us more than we need them, and there is literally nobody anywhere in the world who would choose a market of 50 million people over a market of 450 million people if they were given an obvious choice. There's another one as well, actually, which is it's this week's news, but with a long tail. There's an economist called Simon Johnson. Guess what he's just done? He's just won a Nobel Prize for economics. Guess what he talked about in an interview a couple of years ago? He described Brexit as being self-destructive. So in one corner, you've got Andrea Jenkins, Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson. In another corner, you've got a former head of MI6, the chief executive officer of Eli Lilly, one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world, and you've got a Nobel Prize-winning economist. And if I live to be 212, I will never, ever fully understand how anybody could have thought, I'm going to trust old Daniel Hannan and Mark Francois on this one. I'm going to completely ignore people like Sir Alex Younger, David Ricks and Simon Johnson. But that is, in a sense, water under the bridge. That is, in a sense, all in the rearview mirror. Because here is Wes Streeting, who was equally clear about the idiocy of Brexit until it happened, and was talking to Sophie Ridge on Sky News last night.
I campaigned passionately to remain in the European Union, but a referendum and 2 subsequent general elections settled that question.
But this isn't about remaining in the European Union. There'll be some people genuinely who are thinking, why can't there be, and I'm not saying what's right or wrong here, but why can't there be an open debate about the single market, about the customs union, without this government trying to shut it down?
Well, the debate has been taking place non-stop in the run-up to and since the referendum.
But it doesn't feel like it is now, though, does it?
Well, because I think people have moved. I think people have moved on. The country's moved on. The EU's moved on. And let me tell you, not just here but in Brussels, there is no appetite to relitigate those arguments, to reopen things that have been settled. Actually, it's about
Even if the damage is grave.
It's about a new friendship.
Your own Green Paper says investment is reduced by 11% because of Brexit.
There's no doubt that what we warned about in advance of the referendum in terms of the impact on economic growth has come to pass, and that's a fact of life we have to deal with. I think the sweet spot is working as closely with the European Union where we can, but also showing the agility to work with and through partners in other markets as well. And there is that sweet spot there to unlock, and that will be the agile way in which we work.
I find this so interesting, and not just because well, in fact, I think back to the Catholicism again. I might have to go to Mass on Sunday because you're not supposed to take pleasure in other people's misfortune. That's sinful, and I don't. And you can't really take that much pleasure in being proved right. There comes a point where you have to sort of go, yeah, okay, I'd like to rub your faces in your stupidity, particularly if you were really unpleasant to those of us who were telling you the truth. Oh, here's Steve in Guildford. Brexit again, James. You drag on a has-been to make your case. Why not get Starmer on to ask about a referendum so we don't have to listen to you drone on and on and on? That's Steve celebrating getting his sovereignty back. That's what it sounds like. That's the sound of joy, victory and rapture. Steve in Guildford. On a fast track to Idiot's Corner. But that's the point, isn't it? There's no point me having got everything right, engaging in debates with Steve, who got everything wrong, because Wes Streeting has a point. You know, Steve made the bed, we all have to lie in it. Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, Mark Francois, Daniel Hannan, Nadine Dorries, all the galaxy-brained politicians of the last few years, they made this bed. Everybody honest and intelligent knows that it is ridiculous. I hesitate to use the word intelligent in that context, but I said honest and intelligent. So dishonest, intelligent people can still be either claiming, pretending, or even perhaps believing, because the first thing you do when you become dishonest is start lying to yourself. They can still pretend that it wasn't disastrous, that it wasn't guaranteed to be disastrous, that it didn't deliver, in the words of a former head of MI6, the dreams of Vladimir Putin and the Chinese premier, whose name I always get wrong. I'll just call him Xi. Xi Jinping? Xi. It's like when he said that's what Xi wanted, I thought, hang on, I thought the Chinese premier was a fella. That's genuinely that's why I always get confused about it. So they soiled the bed, and it's frustrating that so many of them remain untouched by the consequences of their own actions. They soiled the bed. There's a word I'd much rather use, but Ofcom have views on such things. These people soiled the bed, and Wes Streeting is saying we all have to lie in it. And I don't want to upset you, but I think he might be right. Because I love coming back to this territory with an air of curiosity. The days of the phones lighting up with people like Steve in Guildford there to ring in and tell me why I was wrong. Here's another one. Brexit and Boris living rent-free in liar, James O'Brien's head 24/7, embarrassing. The days of people like that ringing in to soil themselves on air are over. They're just sitting in mum's back bedroom sending texts and coming up with hilarious nicknames. So there's no actual point in relitigating Brexit phone-ins, because it would be like having a Brexit phone-in about whether or not the sky is blue. Well, even that doesn't work, because the sky can be grey some days. So whether or not healthy grass is green. It would be like having a Brexit phone-in about whether or not the earth is flat. Which reminds me, I must play you some clips of people turning up at Donald Trump rallies recently and answering precisely that question. So there's no point. Even in 2018, 2019, there was still a point to it all. There was still a chance of slamming on the brakes or hitting the reverse gear. It was still worth doing. It was still worth saying to people, look, that thing you're holding in your hand, that is not cheese. That's a piece of moon. The moon is not made of cheese. The people who've sold you that, claiming that it's cheese, they were lying to you. It's moon. It was still worth doing. You know, it was still worth people like the last two texts I've rung out. They thought it's still worth ringing in because I can prove him wrong. Oh, James O. Boring or James O. Brexit, I can prove him wrong. I'll ring in and tell him about all the laws I can't wait, or that it's all about sovereignty, or it's got... They thought it was still worth doing. They know they're idiots now. That's proven. I know they're idiots. I knew that all along. Wes Streeting knows they're idiots. Sir Alex Younger, the former head of MI6, knows they're idiots. Simon Johnson, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, knows that they're idiots. David Ricks, the CEO of Eli Lilly, knows they're idiots. We all know that they're idiots. Even they know that they're idiots. Deep down inside, they know that they're idiots. Farage moves on to his next grift. But he knows that he was an idiot. He doesn't care enough, actually, about the people whose lives he's damaged, the people about whose lives have deteriorated. Ditto Johnson. They know it's a disaster. They can never admit. That's why Johnson has to tell repeated lies about vaccines in a desperate attempt to pretend that it isn't all an almighty disaster. Did you see the interview Johnson gave, where he blamed David Cameron for not having a plan to deliver the unicorns that he had promised to the people who voted for his Brexit? David Cameron does a half-baked job of trying to stand up to the lies and the nonsense, loses, and then the bloke who won said, well, you should be the one delivering on this. I genuinely could not, even knowing what I know about Boris Johnson, that level of disingenuousness and dishonesty and moral depravity, it took my breath away, even this week. I couldn't quite believe when David Cameron did. I won the argument. But I didn't know. Blah blah. And you sit there and you go, "What?" It's absolutely extraordinary that this myth persists. But for them, it has to persist. He can't turn around and say, it'd be like Profumo squared. He can't turn around and accept the disgrace that he deserves any more than Nigel Farage can. They soiled the national bed. And Wes Streeting says we all have to lie in it. And I wonder whether he's right. I wonder whether it matters. Why does it matter that these people, while claiming to be patriotic, delivered the wildest dreams of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping? Why does it matter? What's the point of acknowledging David Ricks is correct, and we've turned ourselves into a supplicant nation, a nation that has to beg big international business to do us a favour and come here, as opposed to part of a market that can say, we'll do you a favour and let you come here. And a Nobel Prize winning economist who knows and explains why it is self-destructive. He's just won a Nobel Prize for showing how institutions determine economic fortunes. And what was the big lesson of Brexit from the people that we've been talking about? Oh, you can ignore the institutions. So how do you feel? I'll play you Wes Streeting's words a little longer, okay? I'll just play, not longer, just one more time, because I think he might be right. I don't think I'm ever going to shut up about it. As long as I'm getting messages like the last two that I read out, I'm going to enjoy, and I know it's a little bit unchristian of me, but I'm going to enjoy rubbing the faces of those people in the evidence of their own excessive stupidity, their own bigoted, largely racist ignorance that led them to simultaneously damage their own country while claiming to be patriotic because they'd had their boils brained so conclusively by some of the worst contributors to political discourse in the history of these islands. So I've earned the right to enjoy reading out these texts and laughing at them. Here's another one from Rob. I can't listen to this trash a minute longer. So there's Rob reflecting upon his glorious victory. There's me holding up a mirror. Rob has a look in it and literally vomits at what he sees because he can't listen for a minute longer. Poor old Rob puking up at the sight of his own reflection through the lens of the Brexit that he was told was going to be brilliant. But everybody knows that it's not brilliant. Even Rob has the brains to realise that it's not brilliant. He's not quite intelligent enough to realise that the reason why he's repulsed by this cavalcade of evidence and fact is because he voted for it and believed it was going to be brilliant. It's a shame you're not still listening, Rob. But what's the point? Listen to Wes Streeting and tell me whether you think, with either a massive sigh of relief because it means you're not going to have to be confronted anymore with the evidence of your own stupidity, or whether, like me, you don't see the point in returning to this territory because it's as if we have voted as a country to swim in treacle for 50 years and we can't now somehow abolish treacle. So I'll play you the Wes Streeting clip after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
The figures are moving very, very fast in the opposite direction. Ask people whether you think it was a bad idea, and the numbers are constantly climbing. Ask people if they want to rejoin, and they say yes. But I think Wes Streeting might be right. I really do. Have a listen to this.
No, I campaigned passionately to remain in the European Union, but a referendum and 2 subsequent general elections settled that question.
But this isn't about remaining in the European Union. There'll be some people genuinely who are thinking, why can't there be, and I'm not saying what's right or wrong here, but why can't there be an open debate about the single market, about the customs union, without this government trying to shut it down?
Well, the debate has been taking place non-stop in the run-up to and since the referendum.
But it doesn't feel like it is now, though, does it?
Well, because I think people have moved. I think people have moved on. The country's moved on. The EU's moved on. And let me tell you, not just here but in Brussels, there is no appetite to relitigate those arguments, to reopen things that have been settled. Actually, it's about
Even if the damage is great.
It's about a new friendship.
Your own Green Paper says investment is reduced by 11% because of Brexit.
There's no doubt that what we warned about in advance of the referendum in terms of the impact on economic growth has come to pass, and that's a fact of life we have to deal with. I think the sweet spot is working as closely with the European Union where we can, but also showing the agility to work with and through partners in other markets as well. And there is that sweet spot there to unlock, and that will be the agile way in which we work.
I'm not even sure there is. I think he's right. I'm not there yet emotionally. But intellectually, what on earth is the point of constantly complaining about the fact that our bed has been soiled? We have only got one bed, and people like Boris Johnson have defecated in it from an incredibly great height. People like Nigel Farage want to carry on rolling around in the muck, and we have no choice. We cannot change our bed. We cannot abolish the treacle that we have voted to swim in. I don't think there is much argument here. I really don't. Do you? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. So it's the maddest thing imaginable that all of the people who voted for it are desperate for us to stop talking about it. And the people I'm talking to are the people who didn't vote for it, the people who knew how stupid it would be. And if they weren't certain then, they're certain now. What's the point of continuing this conversation, this element of the conversation, the element of the conversation that seeks to undo the damage? This is quite liberating for me. You can continue to point it out. You can have a different debate about whether or not that's pointless or whether or not that's worthwhile. But the conversation about undoing the damage that has been done, that would involve in the first instance getting back in to the customs union or the single market. What is the point of that conversation? If you like, in this electoral cycle. I don't know whether I'm asking you to reinvigorate my position, whether I'm asking you to put lead in my battered old pencil, or whether or not I'm asking you to agree with me that actually, we can still have some fun reading out texts from idiots, but the bottom line is that the bed was soiled and we all have to lie in it. It's not even that much fun pointing out how soiled it is to the people who soiled it, because we're sharing it. We're all in the same bed. So what is the point? I would once have quoted George Orwell at this point. I would have said there is truth and there is untruth. And if you can hold on to the truth, even if you are the only one, you will not go mad. But I'm holding on to the truth. The truth is it was an unmitigated bloody disaster. The truth is lots of us knew that it would be. The truth is lots of us said that it would be. The truth is some of us spent years coming under attack from the ones that insisted that it wouldn't be. But they want us to stop talking about it now, which means there's a little bit of you that goes, no, I won't stop talking about it. You've soiled my flipping bed. But I still have to lie in it. And if you're lying in a soiled bed, what's the best thing to do? Ignore the soil? Or obsess about it? Spend your whole life not being able to get to sleep because of the smell of soil in your own bed and your anger at the people who put it there? Or do you have to actually recalibrate, readjust for a new universe, for a new bed, a bed that is soiled? There's something frustrating about the inability of the people that soiled the bed to own their offence, to admit their disgusting, unpatriotic behaviour. But what does that achieve? Even if right now, if you could get these people on some sort of truth and reconciliation commission, get them all on television saying, sorry, I didn't understand anything. My name is Michael Gove and I'm an idiot. My name is Dean Dorries and what would that even achieve? So the European Union decides what happens next. We don't. So what is the point? What is the point of continuing these conversations? And to answer Sophie Ridge's question, which was a good one, there's not even much point about talking what's on the road ahead, because it's all up to them and we're at the bottom of their to-do list. Softer Brexit deal is at the bottom of the EU's to-do list, reports Luke McGee in the newspaper today, in an excellent, evidence, detailed piece about their priorities. They're looking at China. They're looking at Viktor Orban and the hard right. They're looking at Trump. They're looking at America. They're not looking at Keir Starmer. And if Wes Streeting was jumping up and down on the television, demanding that we start addressing these issues, they wouldn't be looking at him either. I'm not asking you to ignore reality, Loz. I'm not denying the importance of cleaning up the mess, James. I'm just saying, what's the point in banging on about it when nothing is going to change in the foreseeable future? It's 11:28. Gary's in Cardiff. Gary, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. Well, I personally think that it's pointless banging on about it, because if we were to negotiate a rejoining to the EU, they would demand that we join the euro and join the Schengen zone just because they couldn't afford to let us leave again. And I don't think this country could tolerate that sort of demand.
It's not that they couldn't afford to let us leave again. It's the old Brexit problem there of thinking that we'd get a different arrangement from every other country on the planet. If you wanted to join now from a position of being a third country, you'd have to set wheels in motion to look at a single currency. And I don't know that Schengen is cast in quite the same stone, but you'd certainly struggle to get any sort of exemption on Schengen because the deal we had was the best available deal and we decided to tear it up and chuck it in the bin. But do you not think that the public have a right to know that? Do you not think that this is where I struggle, Gary? The people who voted for it from a position of complete ignorance. I have a missionary zeal. If I was really deeply ignorant about something, I'd hope someone would tell me. They could probably do it a bit more politely than I manage, but don't people who've been horribly misled, who've been missold, who've been conned, don't they have a right to understand the full scale of what has been visited upon them?
Absolutely, but unfortunately, too many people in the country listen to the right-wing media, and as we all know,
that doesn't change what the truth is. That doesn't change what the truth is. The more loudly the liars shout, the more loudly the people telling the truth should shout.
But these people don't care about the truth.
That's the point.
I mean,
isn't
we've seen that.
That's the point. I don't care about the truth, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't care about the truth. Or does it?
I think we do care. I think some of us do care about the truth, and by all accounts, over 50% of us now care about the truth.
Well over.
But I think once you get to the point of trying to negotiate to go back in,
and that's what Labour knows. That's what Labour knows, and won't set out in quite such clear terms because because it achieves nothing. So they just kind of nudge it along. They just kind of nothing to see here, and it's kind of what Streeting is saying. Actually, he's just not putting it in quite such stark terms because I don't think anybody wants to hear a British politician describe our demotion. That's why Sir Alex Younger's words are so poignant. You have a former head of MI6 describing our entirely self-inflicted decline, deterioration, demotion. You're a football fan. You don't want to hear somebody talking about how you've demoted yourselves, you've relegated yourselves from the Premier League. You just want to get on with doing the best you can do in whatever league you've ended up in. I think there's some truth in that. It's 11:30. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:34 is the time. Big news in the world of conkers. You may have heard this in the bulletin today. There is a cheating row as the men's champion, who succeeded in becoming the men's champion at the umpteenth, the 46th attempt. This fella has been competing since 1977, but this year it all came together. He's now being investigated for cheating, having been found with a steel conker in his pocket, which sounds a little bit like a sort of update of that famous Mae West quote. But it isn't. He did have a steel conker in his pocket. He wasn't just pleased to see you. The investigation is being conducted by a man who will join me before the end of this hour. We will be looking at the ramifications of this story and giving credit where credit is due to whoever it was who was quoted in the story as describing the entire situation as nuts. Chestnuts, presumably. And here's the thing. This is one of those hours where, to be honest with you, it's nice that you ring in, and I will try and speak to you. Alistair will be up next. But I just need to talk sometimes about the stuff that I'm trying to work out, and why do I listen to Wes Streeting say things that make me want to tear my own hair out in frustration, and at the same time think that he's right. He says we lost. You know, the best proof of how awful Brexit is the absolute fury of the people who voted for it whenever you want to talk about it. So it doesn't matter what the people who voted against it think. It doesn't matter what anybody thinks, really. The best proof of how awful everything is the absolute insistence from people who voted for it that we shouldn't be talking about it ever again. Move on, shut up, leave it. All of that. Remember, I've got this wonderful ability to see all the texts that have been sent into the program by somebody, and it would make a box set. The hilariousness, the hilarity of the journey from Rule Britannia, Britannia waves the rules. We're going to be brilliant. The Germans will be chasing over. Oh, it's going to be. I love Jacob Rees-Mogg. Boris Johnson is brilliant. And then the slow drip, drip, drip. Never mention Brexit again. Oh, boring. To go from, you lost, suck it up, ha ha ha. It's going to be brilliant hearing you try to report on all the benefits and all the amazing things that are going to happen, and then you just turn fast forward for 18 months. I never mentioned this. How dare you talk about? Why can't you just? So you will never get better proof of how awful something is than the demands for silence from the people who thought that they wanted it. But what's the point of the rest of us doing this? What is the point? And I'm asking that not rhetorically. I'm hoping that you'll tell me there is a point. 0345 6060 973. It's not about the point of rejoining, which of course is obvious. It would improve our economic situation overnight. It would improve our employment situation overnight. It would improve our security situation overnight. It would improve the futures of our young people overnight. It would improve the retirement plans of countless people who'd been hoping to settle on the continent overnight. The benefits would be immense. But they're not on the agenda. They're not on the horizon. So what's the point of talking about all the stuff? What's the point of talking about how filthy our bed is when we can't currently change it? Alistair's in Stowe. Alistair, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. You really do need to get over it now.
Yes, I think you're right.
As we unfortunately we all do. I'm going to.
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Do we? Do we really? Because I've got 52% of me is agreeing with you. 48% of me wants to rip your throat out.
No, so I was very adamant that we should remain. However, I think when we now ask people what would they like to do, I think it has to be put into context, and whether people assume that we would be going in with exactly the same terms and conditions that we left with, which clearly I'll agree with the chap from Cardiff, we wouldn't be able to do. And therefore, you might find that some people's opinions are slightly different. Yes. When asked that question, what I do feel is quite ironic, though, is that the change to GDP and such like, the reduction in GDP and therefore the economy and therefore what the government can afford to pay out on benefits and taxes, the first group of people that it's actually going to impact is the group that had the biggest majority in favour of leaving the EU.
Yeah. There's the pensioners losing them. Yeah, okay, here's the question. Then why don't Labour it's not fair to make that point because, again, as with the farmers, the numbers don't necessarily deliver the generalisation that many of us have been chewing on for years. But Labour come out and say the reason why we're taking away your winter fuel payment is because you voted for Brexit.
They politically would be suicide, but it's been a little bit naughty. But in a roundabout fashion, it is just one of the consequences, just the same as it's one of the consequences of having to queue up when you go abroad, just the same as it's one of the consequences that people are now moaning that they're going to have to pay £7 for a 3-year visa. And I do watch some. So we stop talking about it altogether, Alistair. We just literally just leave that's it. I mean, because of course, don't forget that these people are going to go on to try and attack the European Convention of Human Rights, or they're going to. Trump's talking about NATO, and he's got plenty of cheerleaders on this side of the channel. The people that soiled the bed will go and soil another bed, while we're arguing about whether or not we should be still talking about the last one. No, I think they do need to be reminded on a fairly regular basis that when things happen and situations are what they are. So, for example, as I say, I watched some lady moaning and effectively
enough about your private life, mate.
Effectively saying that the EU were punishing the UK for leaving by bringing in a visa, but without acknowledging that the UK were the ones who were actually leading the group that wanted to bring in the visa in 2014 in the first place.
When we were in it, the treatment of the third country. I think on that that nitpicking front, there probably is a legal case for arguing that we might be exempt from the single currency under the terms of the Maastricht Treaty, but it would just be a question of whether an exemption that was agreed when we were members could be carried over retrospectively into an exemption that we would still enjoy when we were no longer members but wanted to come back in again. But that's one for lawyers probably 50 years hence. So your prescription is keep demanding accountability from the people that soiled the bed, but stop pretending we can do anything about it.
Absolutely, and don't offer too much to clean the bed up in the first place.
Which is not an option.
I'm not going to wash the sheets for them.
No, well, who's going to wash the sheets then? Where's sheeting? That becomes the problem. I might not use the bed analogy anymore. It's even beginning to make me feel a bit icky. But that's the point, isn't it? There's no precedent for this. There's no analogy. There's nothing like. I mean, I suppose you could talk about a war, but even with wars, the losing side. Well, no, it's not a war because because it's not so simple and obvious that the winner's lost. That's just the maddest thing. We're not equipped for it rhetorically or intellectually or philosophically. If a population does something really stupid to itself, the whole population should seek to undo it, especially the people that led the charge for the cliff edge. But it ain't happening. So what the heck are the rest of us supposed to do? Answer, put up or shut up. Answer 2, we can't put up. Put up what? Therefore, shut up. I like that. Demand accountability. Point out the idiocy. But stop pretending there's anything you can do about it. Chris is in Mansfield. Chris, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Chris.
I believe that we should still be talking about Brexit. I think it's vitally important that we don't shut ourselves down and just submit to lies, to corruption, to the absolute diabolical wreck that us as Britons have put ourselves into. Not all of us, but some of us have voted for this. And I think it's important that we relay the information that the NHS was over 60% European workers. Britain itself was in command as one of the founding members of the European Union. We had veto rights in so many things, and we've given that up entirely.
But this has been true for long before the referendum. And I know you know this. What's the point in pointing it out? Because it's not going to undo any of the damage that's been done. I mean, it's an odd question, isn't it? What's the point of describing the damage? You have to describe the damage in order to begin the process of repairing it. But the damage, that the fundamental breach with the European Union is not. It's not within our gift to repair it. It's not within Keir Starmer or Wes Streeting's gift to repair it. I don't think. I honestly don't think they can. Not in this electoral cycle, not in the next one. So why keep going on about it?
Because effectively, if we just completely shut down, there's a danger of us entering into a political bubble where I work in sales. I'm not going to go into who I work for or anything like that, but I go house to house quite regularly, and I've spoken to a lot of people around the UK, in particular to the Midlands.
Yes.
The amount of people that have said to me that they regret their decision, that if they knew the whole truth and if they knew what these kind of politicians, or if they knew any of the facts, they would have probably voted differently. Even my own mother. I'm a first-generation immigrant, and my mum wanted to vote for Brexit.
Gosh.
Because I coin.
But what are you giving her, apart from guilt and frustration? You're not giving her hope.
No, but I give her forgiveness.
That's a bit. I mean, that's a bit. And that's good and it's healthy, but it's also a little bit. It makes you and me sound a bit arrogant to be dispensing our forgiveness like sort of cardinals of common sense. There's nothing in it for her, really. I mean, I guess she wants your forgiveness particularly, and that becomes a private conversation. But on the public stage, what is the point of, apart from holding the charlatans and the liars to account, because some of them have, of course, gone on to new grifts and new cons and new heights of dishonesty and racist snarling. So you should somehow be able to get a grip on their ankles. But apart from that, and they, Farage in particular can disown it all anyway. No one lies as smoothly as the person claiming, I've got a wonderful Brexit, it just goes to a different school. He's washed his hands of what he's done. So what's the point of trying to... What's the point, Chris?
I think public unity.
But public unity cuts the other way at the moment. Public unity just makes all the people still too stubborn and bigoted to admit that they've made a terrible mistake. It just makes them angrier. And I've just called them stubborn and bigoted. That's not a move towards public unity. You can't. What about you forgiving your mum?
Well, she didn't know that she could vote in the first place, but I'm all for forgiving anybody as long as, obviously,
but they have to repent
for a particular crime or whatever.
They have to repent. They have to show remorse. If they're not showing remorse and they're not going to repent, what's the point of us listing their sins all the time?
We just leave them behind.
Yeah.
So you and I, we come from an intellectual point. We've done the research. We've looked at the facts, but perhaps they haven't. And so if we just leave them behind, they're never going to catch up with us.
And that's how people like Trump. That's how people like Trump end up at rallies full of people who think the Earth is flat and that immigrants are eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio. So you keep the fight against disinformation. You keep the fight against liars. You keep the fight against xenophobia, anti-immigrant rhetoric. But do you need to use this tool, this weapon? Does Brexit need to be part of that conversation? Answer, probably it does, because you have to keep pointing back at it as evidence of what happens when you let these clowns get their hands on the steering wheel. Oh, man, it's a mess, isn't it? It's 11:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12 is the time, and it is time now for a tale of hopes and dreams, a tale of athleticism and technology combining to deliver extraordinary and unprecedented results, but also a tale of alleged deception. A tale that proves the accuracy of the old adage that try and try and try again is the way to proceed, because a man who had tried 46 times to become the Conker champion of these islands has finally succeeded. But that is sadly not the end of the story, because he's now been hit by claims of cheating after a steel chestnut was found in his pocket. For reasons that we should probably establish first, St.John Burkett has been tasked with the job of investigating this allegation, and he joins me now live from the World Conker Championships. St.John, why you?
Why me? I've been on the committee quite a number of years, and we take playing conkers seriously, the event serious. So we're investigating this seriously. We're gathering all evidence, and we've got a good selection of evidence. It sort of indicates innocence at the moment, but we just want to make sure.
You can't do that. You can't say that now. You've got to go through due process. Is there no jury?
Well, the jury will be the committee.
Right.
So I will produce a report for the committee, and the committee will then have to accept the report.
The man who's accused of tampering with conkers or having a steel conker in his pocket was also the man who's in charge of drilling the conkers and inserting the strings. Now, I'm not Columbo, St.John, that's your job. but that seems to me to be a recipe for potential controversy.
Absolutely, yes,
right.
Yes. We do like a bit of controversy in the safe world of conkers. So yes, it is, and we do need to make sure that before we draw any conclusions that we have got the evidence and have sifted the evidence,
right,
including video evidence. We're on VAR at the moment.
There you go. That's him. You get that. No, seriously, I don't want to interfere. The world's media is beating a path to your door. We speak of David Jenkins, of course, known as King Conker. If you've been on the committee for years and he is King Conker, you're old mates. How can you be trusted with this task?
Well, somebody has to do it. If need be, we'll bring in an independent. Something perhaps you could do, James.
And I might be available for this, actually. What actually happened? Because we've jumped straight to the kind of closing scene. We've jumped straight to the one more thing moment in Colombo. We've missed that opening scene where we see the alleged crime actually underway. So he smashed every conker before him in a way that made some people suspicious.
Well, the men's final. So, yes. Okay, so you play through several rounds to get to the men's final. We split the men and women out. They start playing each other, split them out because there's more men than women usually.
Right.
So we have men's world champion versus women's world champion, a grand final, which he lost.
He did to Kelsey Banchbach from Indianapolis, Indiana.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an international sport, conkers. People don't realise that. It's a global.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, team winners from the Netherlands. We got junior winners from Latvia and Germany. Now, he, in the men's final, beat his opponent with a single strike of the conker.
Yeah.
And in the semi-final, 2 strikes. Now, that could be technique honed over 46 years of playing, or it could be something else. We think that he was lucky in the draw, perhaps, because you've got to draw your conkers blind from a bag. You can't bring your own. There's none of that fiddling around with them beforehand. And also, we have judges on each stand. We have two judges. So we have a ring judge that oversees everything. And in the video, it appears to show the judges looking very carefully at his hands and what he's doing.
To make sure.
It also appears to show him putting his hand in his pocket and pulling out a conker and throwing it to the crowd.
How was the steel conker found, St. John?
He showed it to a journalist after the event.
Which is not necessarily the actions of a guilty man.
Not necessarily, no.
Unless, of course, he's doing a double bluff. Unless it's exactly what a guilty man would do. Because then people like me would say that's not the actions of a guilty man.
Absolutely. And we're trying to find out whether anybody knew about this conker before the start of the event. And we're just waiting to speak to one of the judges, in fact, the chief umpire, who we believe may have the answer to that. I also like the story, your description of athleticism, because before the event, he said to me, well, St. John, he said, I might be able to come along to the event, but my legs aren't what they were. I might manage a couple of hours, but I'm going to need to sit down.
You can't do conkers sitting. That'll be the New York Times there, St. John. Seriously.
Yeah,
it is. Before you go, I've got one more question, I'm a little reluctant to raise this point. But do you remember when Heinz claimed that they were discontinuing salad cream?
Yeah.
And they got loads and loads of publicity.
Yeah.
And then they admitted that they were never discontinuing salad cream at all. But lo and behold, salad cream had enjoyed its biggest PR push in the history of salad cream. Is it possible that you and your colleagues at the World Conkers Championships are swinging, not the lead on this occasion, but swinging the conker?
I would love to say that it was, but it wasn't our story in the first place.
Was it not?
No, it was journalists' story. We have plenty of journalists come along to the event, and this came from the journalists, didn't come from us.
Okay. 2,000 enthusiasts in attendance in Southwick, Northamptonshire. Is it always held in is it Southwick or Southwick?
It is, yeah. It's run by volunteers, and we've got all our infrastructure there and everything. But anybody else wants to come along and help run it, fantastic.
So, okay.
Get in contact.
Younger generation. I noticed the defeated finalist in the men's was only 23, and the woman that won the whole thing was 34. So it's a younger generation coming through.
Absolutely.
Final question: when's the verdict? When will we know? When can King Conker sleep easy or not?
Yeah, hope to top and tail this by tomorrow. Certainly, some point tomorrow.
I shall alert the news desk.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much indeed, St. John, the head judge there, or chief investigator into alleged shenanigans at the World Conker Championships. Good to hear about all the Europeans in attendance, the Dutch team, the Netherlands team winning the team, the youth from Latvia, Germany, all over the place. It's almost like Brexit never happened. Mark's in Swiss Cottage to take us back to Brexit. Do we need to essentially move on, not the right phrase, but as Wes Streeting is advising us to do we need to stop talking about the possibility of reversing it?
No, we definitely don't. I think the point is it's essential to understand, to keep talking about it, it's essential to understand how and why it happened. Because I think we need the correct perspective to start to repair the damage, both to our sort of our national European identity and our individual European identity. I don't think it was just the lies. I think there was also a sort of a mechanical process that just went fundamentally wrong, because we were comparing membership with multiple possibilities.
Yes, of course.
Sort of known with an unknown. One was defined in law precisely, and the others were a load of ephemeral delusions.
Well, I know that. You know that. One of us has written a book. Well, at least one of us has written a book about it. You probably have as well. But
no, certainly not. No.
But what I mean, who are we talking to? I think there's a danger, Mark, of just talking to each other.
I think listening to Wes Streeting say that you can't relitigate this.
Yes.
I think when so much damage has been done, and when there were obviously the lies, but also the process was fundamentally flawed, I think we've really got to be prepared to look at it again, get the right perspective, get a truthful perspective.
But is it too soon? I think I might argue it's too soon to do that. I can't dispute much of what you say, but what's the point of doing it now? What's the point of doing it in this electoral cycle?
Because I think the longer it's left, the more it becomes set in custom, if you like.
Yeah.
And I think you see, I think that the day after the referendum, I think on the 24th of June, when Cameron came to the lectern and sort of decided to scuttle off into the undergrowth, I think if instead of that he'd said he stood there, hadn't resigned, and said, "Look, we got this outcome, this result. We need to understand what it means. What does it mean?" If that had been interrogated at that point, which was very soon, I think it would have been very clear, very relatively quickly, that there really was.
That's interesting. So you're not suggesting he should have been charged with actually delivering it, which is Boris Johnson's latest grift, claiming that it was David Cameron's job to deliver what Boris Johnson told everyone would be brilliant. But if David Cameron had essentially played the role of Jim Bowen and said, "This is what you could have won," and talked everybody through what they had actually won, then the entire conversation would have got off on a different footing, because however much they shouted, "That's not true, Project Fear, everything's going to be brilliant," he could have said, "This is all now true. This is what being a third country means. This is going to happen. This has now been voted for. There you go. Over to you."
Yes, exactly. And he could have compared on a one-to-one basis membership, precisely defined in law, with all these other alternatives, which would have been defined more precisely, and it would have been very obvious. Yeah. And it would have been very obvious there was nothing better than membership.
But that's in the rear view mirror. That's not necessarily a case for what we should be trying to do on the road ahead, is it? Except that there's something about natural justice here, I think, for you and for me. Just this sense that cheats should never prosper. And at the moment, arguably, they are.
Yes, it's late, but I think, as I say, better late than never. And I don't think it's too soon to do it. I think the sooner this thing gets underway, personally, I think the better, because it's really causing too much damage.
So why are you still talking about this? Because cheats should never prosper. And in this country, at this time, as a consequence of Brexit, cheats are still prospering. And if you care about principles like that, if you care about truths like that, simple truths like that, as Mark does and as I do, then you'd probably have to tell Wes Streeting to give his head a wobble. Unless he responded by saying, yeah, no, by all means, you carry on pointing out the cheats and the lies. I don't dispute any of them. I don't deny any of them. But as a government, there's not much point in us joining in. 12:01 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I haven't been on a stag do for ages. Do you know what a soppy git I was when I got married, or when I was getting married to Mrs. O'Brien? My mates took me out, and we ended up in the kind of place in Soho that you don't know about unless you spend an awful lot of time in Soho. This is going back 24 years, remember, 25 years. So it's no longer the case, really. I've got Rupert Everett on full disclosure this week. I don't think that's the one that's coming out this week, but I'm recording it this week. Last time I saw Rupert Everett was when he was campaigning to retain, if you like, the more traditional elements of Soho in the face of epic redevelopment. If you're not familiar with Soho in central London, you'll be familiar with its reputation. Well, the reputation no longer applies. But when I was getting married, it still did. And I was very uncomfortable in this kind of very louche and amoral environment. I ended up phoning my then fiancée, now wife, and meeting up with her around the corner because she'd been out with her mates in the same part of town. I mentioned this not to paint a picture of my virtuous self, but just to sort of admit that my I'd never been on a kind of everybody's dressed as Clark Kent kind of stag, and I went to one in Barcelona once, which was great fun and involved, places that I would never go to in any other circumstances than a stag night. But I haven't got much to draw on, is what I'm telling you, when I read in today's Times that Prague has had enough of British stag do antics. Amsterdam, Munich and Budapest have also banned beer bikes, which we still have in London, actually. But what I want to know is, I want to know two things. I want to know whether the British deserve a particular reputation for having unpleasant antics on stag do's. I want to know whether this is a peculiarly British condition, and working on the principle that it is, I want to know why. One of Prague's deputy mayors has said that the Czech capital now wants a more cultured, wealthier tourist, not one who comes for a short time only to get drunk. I like this argument. The notion of stag do offers from travel agencies have hit Prague harder than almost anywhere else. It may have lost some of its crown to Benidorm, but the British stag party, as a unique phenomenon. Is that true? Is that fair? 0345 6060 973. Did you have your trip? Did you have your lovely city break ruined by a British stag group? I don't want to fall out with anybody, but in my experience, I find them quite annoying but funny. I don't know where the line is between obnoxiousness and amusement. The idea that 12 men in fake boobs come bouncing down the road, all bellowing at their that doesn't offend me. That doesn't offend my sensibilities. Some people, of course, are horrible when they're drunk, but an awful lot of people are just very silly. Do British stag parties deserve the reputation that the deputy mayor of Prague is attributing to them? And if so, why? Why do British people behave worse when they're away on stag weekends than other people? How big is the problem? 0345 6060 973. And how British is it? How big is the problem and how British is it? Okay, that's what I want to know. Give me a call and just fill me in on what's going on. We need to be careful. Eleanor, the producer, is quite worried about what we can't do is take calls describing in detail debauchery. Or at least if you're going to have a crack at describing debauchery in detail, be aware that it's a family programme and it's lunchtime. I don't mind you putting people off their lunch. I spent most of the last hour talking about Nigel Farage soiling your bed. So that's off the table. I can't complain about that, but I do need you to be careful about breaking rules of both common decency and Ofcom broadcasting regulation. So I can't hear details of behaviour that you found. Well, run it by the producer, but be clever as well about it. Be a little bit thoughtful. If it's not something that you would announce in an office full of people, it's probably not something that you should ring in and share with me. But how big is the problem and how British is the problem? I don't know that I've ever had a holiday or a weekend away ruined by a stag group. As Rich says, they're absolutely horrendous, James, unless you're part of it yourself. I've never had that experience, but I do balk slightly at the idea that the Brits are worse than the Dutch or the Brits are worse than the Germans. In fact, James in Cheltenham has balked at the idea that it's the Brits. He says it's the English. It's yobbish and it lacks imagination and it's a peculiarly English condition. The Times puts British in the headline, and I don't know that excluding our Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish compadres is necessarily a fair way to behave. But I want to know why you say obnoxious stag do and half of Europe says British. Is it fair? 0345 6060 973. Like football hooliganism. You follow football hooliganism back in the 80s from this side of the English Channel. You'd think we invented it. It's simply not the case. There's loads of just as bad, if not worse, miscreants supporting other European clubs. So it could be falling a little bit into that category. But the point at which it becomes a problem, the question of how big the problem is, and then for me at least, the most interesting question of how British the problem might be. And how much damage does it do to an otherwise nice area? Is it once you get on that list of potential stag destinations, does it become, for the people that live there or the people that have more traditional holidays there, does it actually become unbearable? So you've got a broader backlash against over-tourism. Hungarian government is now thinking of hitting a limit on Airbnb properties in Budapest. You've got a kind of sense that communities are having their souls sucked out by people who aren't living there anymore or renting their properties to people who do live there. They're putting them all on Airbnb instead. But this is very different. This is about advertising campaigns that specifically target stag do's and the question of what impact it has on previously quite pleasant environment. So Prague has been inundated with British people seeking cheap drinks and the women, as one stag do participant told a local radio station after breaking off a rendition of "Can't Take My Eyes Off You." So the beer, the slapstick comedy, and the strip shows, the strip and steak combos is in one advertisement. Forgive me for this, it's not trigger warning territory, but it's a little adult. A spicy lesbian show in the mud is also advertised in one Prague destination, and you have an Al Capone dinner that culminates in the groom's mock arrest. So Prague has put an enormous amount of effort into attracting a very specific type of visitor, and it looks as if they might have had enough. How big a problem is this for everybody else? 0345 6060 973. And how British is it? How British is the problem? I quite like, there's some great contributions here already, actually. The idea, this from Chris, that stag do's are funny in the afternoon, but they're a big problem after midnight. But it's not confined to continental Europe, he says. Spend a night in Liverpool and then witness the absolute mess the next day. It's definitely not an English-only problem. Plenty of Irish, Scottish and Welsh fellas act exactly the same. So James in Cheltenham on relatively lonely ground with that claim. And then, of course, we've got the question of what happened to you, which is the question that Eleanor is worried about. The idea that you're going to ring in and tell us something that will get me taken off air for broadcasting absolute filth. I don't want absolute filth on the programme. However much you might want to see me taken off air. We're not doing that. We're not. But we are interested in, can a stag do ruin a holiday? I mean, genuinely ruin it. So you look back on that long weekend or that week away, and the abiding memory, the overriding memory that you have is of a stag group, a stag party that actually wrecked everything for you. Okay? That's the question at the heart of all the other questions. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. You know, just to go from the... What, we're going from the ridiculous to the sublime, or from the sublime to the ridiculous. The other contender for our conversation this hour was Kemi Badenoch issuing a pamphlet as part of our campaign. You've heard about this. Sheila talked about it yesterday, describing autistic people as receiving better treatment or being the beneficiaries of economic privileges and protections. And I realised I'd actually reached my... I can't bring myself to talk about her anymore. Not at least for the rest of this week. I know that there's a Conservative leadership battle going on, but goodness me, every time you think you might have reached a period where the worst excesses of poison in UK politics had just gone into retreat for a while, up pop honest Bob Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch. So that's why we're talking about stags. It's 12:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:17 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention to the notion of the British stag do being A, worse than any other, and B, a blight upon the destinations in which it unfolds. So a fella in Prague who embarked on a 10-day hunger strike last spring in protest at the proliferation of British people going there to celebrate their imminent nuptials, British men, describing his entire life as having been ruined by chronic noise, and then possibly an unfortunate phrase, describing the genocide of ordinary resident life in the centre of Prague. So there are three questions here. How bad is it? How British is it? And what happened to you? Tom's in Woodbury in Devon. Tom, you can kick things off. What would you like to say?
Hi, James. I was on a stag do 8 years ago in Bratislava in Slovakia. I was typically one of those sort of badly behaved stag goers. I drank a lot, felt a bit privileged. I decided to get my kit off in a nightclub. Okay. And
are you a rugby player?
I'm a rugby player and an ex-Marine.
How did I know that? That's uncanny, isn't it? It's almost like I can read minds. Why did rugby players always want to take their clothes off, Tom?
Well, I was trying to impress our stag tour guide.
Right.
And actually, the bouncers didn't take too kindly to me and gave me a good roughing up, which I think I deserved.
Well, you did actually get beaten up?
Yeah, I got carried up 3 flights of stairs by my neck, and then they started to sort of proceed to sort of rough me up a bit on the floor outside.
And as a former Marine, you were used to physical discomfort.
Yeah. But actually, the stag tour guide,
yes,
who I'd like to say we've now been happily married for 3 years, she saved my life.
What did she do?
Well, she got right in there, nails and everything, with the bouncers. They pushed her about a bit as well, but she managed to drag me out of there, recover my clothes.
How long have you been married?
I was married 3 years in November.
Have you had any children yet?
No, not yet.
How are you? I mean, no reason why you should. Perfectly entitled not to. But the story of how Mum and Dad met. How do you think you're going to approach that one?
Well, I quite look forward to it.
No. I've got my parenting spurs, mate, and you haven't. So your 6-year-old daughter wants to know how Mum and Dad met. What are you going to say?
That Mum was a tour guide, and I was a very well-behaved tourist.
And then, as she gets a little older and hints drop out, and other people, you're still mates with a lot of the people that were on the stag.
Yeah, best friends. I mean, we see them all the time.
So the truth,
and it's a great story for everyone, really.
I love the story. And it flies in the face of one of my favourite theories, which is that no one has ever said to their dad, how did you meet my mum? And he says, I leant out my van window and complimented her on her physique. It's not, you're not in that space, because obviously you hadn't done anything to be obnoxious or to be offensive, but you remember enough of it to remember thinking, wow, this woman's amazing.
Well, she needed a TripAdvisor review, so she managed to get my number. So she actually came to me.
And is it a peculiarly British condition when you're on these sort of trips? I'm just looking at Bratislava. It's a beautiful place, but you won't have any idea about that. Unless you've been back to visit now that your family.
My parent-in-laws live there.
Yeah, I was going to say, now you've seen the castle and all the rest of it, you know it's a beautiful place. But when you're on a stag, you've got no idea.
I think it is quite British, but only because I think that we started doing it first, and I think it tends to be to countries where it was a lot cheaper to booze.
Yeah, that's the point, isn't it?
And cheap flights, and I think once it's sort of almost become a bit of a tradition that it's okay to just let a bit loose, which I also now when I go back to my wife's city,
yes,
and I walk through the town centre in the middle of the day, and it's just stag do after stag do in every pub.
Right.
I do find it a little bit off-putting for me, and I don't even live there, and I used to be one of them.
And it's good for the economy, and your wife had a job supporting that side of the economy, but there is that, it's an interesting balance. You're absolutely right, I'd missed that point. You could fly there on one of the budget airlines and get absolutely bladdered for a fraction of what it would have cost you to do so in a British town or a British city. And Bratislava, for people who don't know, is the largest city in the Slovak Republic. So, like the kind of, in the former Czechoslovakia, you've got Prague in the Czech Republic, and you've got Bratislava in the Slovak Republic. How fair is it to collar British people more than other nationalities for this kind of behaviour? And how bad is it? 0345 6060 973. Danny's in Islington. Danny, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Big fan. Been listening a long time.
That's very kind.
No worries. And I went to Budapest on mine, so that was 2017, and I've been married ever since successfully, so nothing went wrong.
Yes.
Yeah, thank God. And and I went back. So I don't know if I went back. So I've always kind of done a stag do and then been back. So I've done Budapest, I've done Berlin, I've been to Prague, but then I've done the whole English thing. I've been to Edinburgh twice. London stag do's. I do think it is a reserve of just being very over-the-top British, silly. I mean, I'm middle class. But then I've got a whole range of mates that do a lot of sports. I've got a lot of that kind of.
Why is it a British? Do other countries not do stags in the same? I mean, literally don't have big. Regardless of how you behave when you're on the stag, you don't do the overseas 20 lads, 10 lads together, all on the rampage. You just don't do it. So it's not even a question of behaviour. It's a question of whether or not other countries do it at all.
Well, I know a few. Again, I do a lot of running, so I know quite a few international guys, Swiss, Germans, a couple of obviously they're not going to because it's not a thing. But with the European, German, Dutch, they do, but they don't do the 7 till midnight and then, or whatever time o'clock, and then get up at 4 or 5 in the morning to crack on with the stuff you do, and then drink again. And weirdly, the domestic ones are always a lot tamer, is the word to use.
Yes.
There's not as much drinking. It's not like you don't.
What goes on tour stays on tour, doesn't it? That's probably part of the impulse. You feel a bit cut loose. You feel a bit unleashed, and so you behave in ways that you wouldn't behave. Hopefully, wouldn't behave in British cities. How old are you now, Danny?
I am 35, and I was 27, and also my stag do was the first of all my. Well, little wild, I'd say, of everyone getting married. But I had 28 blokes on mine.
Good Lord.
All from all parts of the country, Scottish, Welsh.
That's nice.
Yeah, it was very nice. And, I'm not going to say working class up to upper class.
No, you'll sound like Rishi Sunak, mate.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
I've got friends from all classes, working class, middle class, well, maybe not working class. So it was, and nothing too exuberant. There's nothing you look back on with shame, or is there?
Apart from me walking through in a thong, I had to wear a fat suit and a thong walking through Budapest, but I'm like your previous caller, being a rugby guy, but runners are quite skinny, and he's not a body you really want to see on show, really.
Sinewy, Danny, sinewy.
Exactly, lean, mean running machine.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wonder what the people in. I mean, imagine if you'd never. Thank you. I like these stories. I like these kind of. They are peculiarly British, these tales. But what would you do if you'd never left Budapest and you thought if I can't go to Britain, everyone's walking around in a fat suit and a thong. This is like your insight into the British culture comes entirely from stag weekends. What would you think about Britain? You wouldn't come here in a million years, would you? And you weren't paying attention, David. The reason why. What was the first fella's name? The reason why is the tour guide wasn't his fiancée when he was on the stag. The tour guide was the tour guide when he was on the stag. She rescued him from some bouncers that were kicking his head. What? Tom? What was it, Tom? Tom. She rescued him from the bouncers that were beating him up, and true love blossomed subsequently. It's not he didn't go on a stag with his fiancée acting as a tour guide for him and all his mates in Bratislava. 12:25 is the time. Terry's in Surbiton. Finally, a female voice. Terry, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
It's Kerry with a K.
Kerry with a K. Right, that's it. Heads will roll. Also, as soon as I said that, I thought, I bet there's a mistake. I thought the mistake would be the other letter. I thought it would be the F next to your name, not the letter at the beginning of it. But Kerry, finally a female voice. What made you pick up the phone?
I was just saying that it wasn't many years ago, but pre-COVID, I flew for a big airline, our airline. I won't say which one.
I'll never work that one out. Go on.
That's really good.
Yes.
But anyway, we were in Prague, and I was with a crew, a European crew in those days, so it wouldn't have been that big, but there were probably about 8 or 10 of us. And we landed quite late, and sort of we'd leave the hotel and then go and find, a bar.
Yes, of course.
Have a drink out or whatever. So it was probably, 10:30, something like that. So we went into 2 bars first, round sort of the captain actually knew where to go, which was great. So we went into these 2 kind of bars down the little road, and neither of them were keen, and we kind of got funny looks in the first one, so we thought, okay, well, we'll move on. The second one, they were quite a lot more sort of, wouldn't come over, serve us, this kind of stuff. So eventually, having got up from that and tried one more, I mean, we were all thinking, well, maybe they're shutting, or maybe there's some other. We would never have thought of it. Finally, the guy, we said to the waiter, what's going on?
Yes.
Why won't you serve us? And he said, well, are you here to party? Are you are you on a stag do or a hen do? And we kind of, one thing, why would we have done that if we'd all been together?
Yes.
For a start, we were both married. But we said no, we told him who we were. And they said, oh, well, we just don't want them anymore. We just, the Brits, he actually said the Brits are just too much trouble.
Was there a tiny bit of you that felt proud at that point?
Yeah, I think it's...
I don't know if that's the correct response. I think the phone line's gone funny. That's what I want next, in the next half of this hour. I want the view from there. So I want to speak to the Bratislavan tour guide, or I want to speak to the Czech bar owner. I appreciate that. It's a little bit ambitious of me, given that I'm presenting a radio programme in London today. But I think the first caller this morning was from Detroit. Right? So, you don't get if you don't ask. That line there about, we don't want you here. Where for you is the... Because you might think it's charming to walk down in a sort of sumo wrestler suit and a thong, but actually, if you're trying to have a romantic dinner, or you're trying to serve, Michelin-starred food on that street corner, it's the last thing on earth that you want. So how do we look from there? There doesn't seem to be much challenge so far to the idea that this is a peculiarly British phenomenon, and then we'll do the why of it. Why would this be a British thing that is not replicated? Not the celebration, not having a hen night or a stag do, but having a particularly debauched or if you prefer, exuberant experience. Why is that peculiar to British men? 0345 6060973. It's coming up to 12:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I had another story for you as well, which was going to be a missing word from the headline, but I can't. Yes, here it is. So this is Keith was delighted with this story. Can you see what word is missing from this headline? Okay, BBC chief bans blank as a term for presenters after controversies. So BBC chief bans what word as a term for presenters after controversies? I'm going to give you a clue. It's not cauliflowers. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 is the time. I bet you're wondering how I'm going to bring Shakespeare into this, aren't you? Well, you'll find out in a minute. Special prize if you already know. I'll give you a clue. It sprang to mind when I asked Kerry, with a K, whether or not she actually felt a strange swelling of pride when the Czech bar owner said to her that the British drink more than everybody else. We can't be doing... Because you shouldn't feel pride at that. It's pathetic. But you're in quite good company. I'll a little bit more about that in a moment. If you're just tuning in, we're looking at stag do's in places like Prague, Bratislava. Other places that have problems in this field include Amsterdam, Munich and Budapest. We're no longer wondering whether this is a peculiarly British phenomenon, because we're confident that it is, albeit I think, the Irish probably are pretty much shoulder to shoulder. But we are wondering why. Why is this a sort of British/Irish issue, or a British for the purposes of this headline? Why do British men have to behave in this way when they go overseas in a way that other people from other countries don't? 12:34 is the time. 0345 6060973. I know Renata's in Bavaria. We'll go to her shortly, but I also want to hear from people in the destinations. If you live in a destination, or you have lived in a destination, talk to me about what it's like to have these groups of people turning up. So we saw Coriolanus last night. It's an extraordinary production of a very difficult play at the National Theatre. David Oyelowo giving a performance. The whole cast was magnificent, but I know Coriolanus really well. I did it at school. I was in it. I didn't study it, and it's a really tricky play because he's not the most sympathetic character that has ever been portrayed on the stage. But I'm in a Shakespeare mood at the moment, and Eleanor, the producer, reminded me that Iago in Othello, which, spoiler alert, is another one of Shakespeare's plays where everybody's dead at the end. Iago in Othello offers up the description of the English as the international goats for drinking. I learned it in England. He's talking about a drinking song that he sings when he's trying to get Cassio plastered for slightly unpleasant reasons. I learned it in England, where indeed they are most potent in potting. You'd like that line as an actor, wouldn't you? Most potent in potting. Your Dane, your German and your swag-bellied Hollander, drink ho, are nothing to your English. So he's effectively, this is Shakespeare in the 17th century, doing two things. Establishing English superiority when it comes to drinking, singling out the Danes, the Germans and the Dutch for particular comparison and abuse, and also, of course, appealing to that weird swelling of pride that I described when I was talking to Kerry. Because you know how the groundlings would respond to this. You've got Iago, one of arguably Shakespeare's most unpleasant creation, Iago. I mean, including Titus Andronicus' stepsons. You remember what Coleridge said about Iago, don't you? Motiveless malignancy. That's how Coleridge described Iago. Motiveless malignancy. He's a hideous human being, motivated entirely by malignancy. But here, he's appealing to the groundlings. He's appealing to the crowd at the theatre in Elizabethan times. I learned it in England, where indeed they are most potent in potting. So all the groundlings at this point go, hey, they've probably got a beer. They're probably having a beer. They're probably tossing the beer around like at the football. Why, he drinks you with facility. Your Dane dead drunk, which means he can drink a Dane under the table. He sweats not to throw your Almain. What's an Almain? Someone from Almain. Almain. Anyway, he can outdrink everybody. He gives your Hollander a vomit. The next pottle can be filled, so the Dutch fella is puking up while the Englishman is still sinking another pint. So this reputation is not new. It certainly is not confined to the era of the budget airlines. but it would seem, a peculiarly English/British phenomenon. I want to know why. And I want to know what it looks like if you are the destination for these trips, for these parties. 0345 60 60973. Renata is in Bavaria, in Germany. Renata, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi.
Hello.
Nice to speak to you again.
Likewise.
I could speak for Munich because I lived in Munich very, very long time, and I'm now very close to Munich again. You see, we don't have this tradition in Germany. Our tradition is to have a Polternacht, or Polterabend, which is the night before the wedding.
Yes.
And it's a party men and women have together.
Everybody goes to... That sounds a little bit more civilized, actually.
It's really a party at a special place. You don't wander around on that day. You smash a lot of china on that occasion.
Why?
So, Polter means krach.
Oh.
You kind of make a lot of noise.
Why are you smashing china? I mean, that's not... I mean, this is arranged in advance. You don't just turn up at a restaurant and start smashing the place up.
You don't go to a restaurant.
So you have it at home.
This is a party.
What's the tradition? Why smash china, though?
This is our tradition because this is supposed to bring luck, and you're never allowed to smash glass. Glass is unlucky, but china is luck. And those is luck for the couple, and the couple is there, and all their friends, male and female, are together. So we don't have the stag night, we don't have the hen night.
So when you're sitting in a beer keller in Munich, minding your own business and having a nice stein of ale, and then a British stag party turns up, that must be like visitors from outer space.
This is what I wanted to tell you. You know, we were sitting in a Munich beer hall together with British friends.
Yes.
And a group of females came in dressed in something which was very strange to anybody because it was not the carnival season.
What were they wearing?
They were drunk.
What were they wearing? What were they wearing?
Well, I don't know, bikinis and funny headsets and
this was just the men?
Things. No, this was female.
Oh, okay,
female.
It was a hen
night. They were drunk, and they came in these kind of costumes, and they addressed the people, and of course they addressed the people in English. So a lot of the visitors in that beer hall, they just said they're stupefied, you know. And then our British friends and us, we went around and explained people, this is an English tradition, they do it before a wedding, and this is called a hen night. So you have to imagine what it feels when you're in a place where you don't have this tradition, where you do not understand what the people do and what they want from you.
No.
These girls wanted to collect money to have more drinks, you know. So people really felt a bit aggravated by being asked money, you know, from these
so they were begging.
Of wild girls. Yes,
Drunk British women started begging for beer money.
Yeah. Well, they were not begging. They were asking for it.
Well, it's the same. I mean, you know, it's splitting hairs, really. They might not have been sitting there with a pot in their hand, but they were essentially begging. The women are worse than the men then, perhaps.
I don't know, but all I wanted to tell you is really that other countries do not have the tradition.
No, clearly. And it would come as a bit of a shock. So, what is... Actually, I can't. Sometimes I get texts and people say, ask this caller about that. And then I think that might be something I don't know about. So I'm not going to ask you about that. Apparently it's a habit in Germany, but I don't know that I may have misunderstood the text. So it doesn't put people off the Brits. It just makes you think that we're weird.
Yeah, well, it might put people off if they feel really too much attacked by people they do not understand in that moment. Your caller might say that by now they do have stag and hen nights here in Germany as well, but we only copy the British. So
yes, you see, we're cultural ambassadors.
Yeah,
that's the way it goes.
It's still not so that you have heard of many people going abroad and having a stag night or a stag week or hen night or hen week there.
I have now got this message from more than one person. So what is the German tradition of fight drinking?
Well, this is a normal tradition in any kind of drinking situation that you try to drink the other person under the table.
And so it's like a duel?
That's a duel.
And that takes us back to Jago, who wrote about how nobody... Oh! Remind me what the German word for Germany is.
Deutschland?
No, the other one.
Alemannia?
Yes. So that's what Shakespeare's talking about. When he says the Englishman can drink the man from Alamein under the table, he means Germany. So that is Shakespeare talking about fight drinking.
Yeah, but fight drinking is not a fight, but two people sit at a table and they try to drink more than the other one.
It's a duel.
But it's not walking through all the pubs and drinking as much as you can.
I love the way you're talking about two people sitting at a table and drinking until one of them falls over, as if it's perfectly normal and respectable behaviour. But then, as soon as you, yes, I know you think it is. But then, as soon as you start talking about a British stag do marching in bikinis, you start chuckling as if this is the behaviour of absolute imbeciles. I'm not sure there's that world of difference between the two practices, Renata.
No, but the one thing between two people having a duel.
Yes.
That concerns these two people and perhaps the friends who share the table.
Oh, I see. It doesn't involve the whole place. You don't have the whole restaurant or the whole bar being
stag nights or hen nights. It's like they swamp the whole restaurant. They go through the tables. They ask every table, give us money for more beer and all these things. So it does concern much more people than if two people just have a fight over beer.
No. Okay, I will allow you that slightly patronising chuckle. In that case, you probably are describing a superior cultural pursuit than the ones that the Brits engage in. So there's our first one, but that's not even a stag night. What happens when the Brits turn up? What does everybody else... What would you do? I mean, do some venues... I presume some venues become almost exclusively dedicated to these kind of events, these kind of practices. Should we go to Anil, who's in Birmingham? Anil, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hello, how are you?
I'm all right. What's going on?
Yeah, no, good fan of the show. First-time caller, long-term listener. James, wow, where do I start? So,
Prague.
It definitely is.
Start in Prague, please.
Yeah, well, I've been to Prague twice. Didn't really want to go, to be fair. It was a stag thing. We went in my late 20s, enjoyed ourselves to a certain degree, and then went in my early 30s. And, you do what you do in Prague. It was fine, it's great. But we really do ruin it. And I think it's something in our culture because, it's not just the white British do it, it's also the Indians as well. And I went with my group of friends to Prague. And we do ruin it. I mean, Prague is
What, you ruin the whole of Prague?
Well, Prague itself, it's beautiful in the sense of the old Prague town.
I see what you mean, yes.
Prague. And we were going out there, doing what Brits do best. Unfortunately, our stag, bless him, he went on a Segway. We all went on Segway, and then he fell over and snapped his tendon in his kneecaps, which then resulted to us to go to the local hospital and have an early flight back to the UK.
Well, at least you can get an idea of the local culture then.
Oh God, yeah, and
Did he recover? Did he make a full recovery?
Yeah, the wedding got postponed. His fiance was absolutely livid.
She was delighted, wasn't she? Could he not have hobbled up? Could he not have hobbled up the aisle, or did they take a view that they'd want to wait longer and do it properly?
No, I don't know. They delayed it for I think about 8-9 months in, and then obviously it was all kind of like the elephant in the room when it came to actual reception and stuff. But you always look back and think, oh my days, what did we do?
Don't mention the tendons. And that was again. I don't know that I'm making any distinctions between brown and white Brits on this one, Anil. I think they're all as bad as each other. You turn up with an English accent, and the owner of the hostelry is either going to start spending the money he's about to make that night, or he's going to try and get you slung out.
No, but I thought I'd phone in.
It's one or the other. Thank you, mate. Mind how you go. 12:46 is the time. This is from, actually from two... I can't work out who this is from. I worked in a hostel in Budapest. We ended up refusing to take bookings from groups of more than 3 Englishmen at a time because the bigger groups would be rude to the other guests, be constantly drunk, and often behave inappropriately with the female guests as well. So, OK, Brian's saying it's the English, not the Scottish or the Welsh. All right, well, so far, so... Yeah, all right, that might be true. I think the fella who married the tour guide, didn't he say that he had people from all corners of the kingdoms with him on that trip? The one who very, very nearly did an accidental Rishi Sunak tribute act by claiming that he was friends with people of all classes, middle class, upper class, working class. No, not working class.
James O'Brien on LBC.
The more you think about it, the weirder it is. Actually, I mean, why do we split up? I like the idea of what they do in Germany, where you have a party for both sides of the church, as it were, both sides of the ceremony, the men and the women, or the bride and the groom. But why on earth? Where did that come from, I wonder? That's one for Mystery Hour, actually. Special prize to anyone. No, there won't be a prize. Special, I don't know, nod. So maybe even an extra round of applause for anyone who rings in with that question. Where does it come from? Especially if, as seems to be the case, it's not commonplace in other countries. Why and when did British people decide to go out and have a massive celebration with people of only the same gender in preparation for their wedding day? I don't know. I really don't. I do know that it seems to be a peculiarly British practice, and I want to know how people feel when they're on the receiving end of it, what it's like to be at the destination. And after, we'll talk to Aggie next, and after that, I'll tell you what the missing word. Quite a few people have got this wrong, actually. I like it when you... Yeah, I know. Well, look, I know the obvious answer, Anthony, is infidelity. It gives people an opportunity to have a sort of last hurrah. But I find that quite a bleak and depressing analysis, because I'm pretty sure that if you are intending to cheat upon your fiancé on your stag or your hen weekend, then your fiancé doesn't think you are. It's not like everyone go, oh, you go away and sow your oats for one last weekend and then we'll get married next Saturday. So I don't think it is that. I don't think it did come from America. And A gets a special mention today, suggesting that it all began with the Jolly Boys outing and Only Fools and Horses. That's from AJ. No, it didn't. But that gives me a wonderful opportunity to give you a little heads up on the fact that yesterday I conducted one of my favourite full disclosure interviews of all time. And if I tell you that AJ's text about the Jolly Boys outing on Only Fools and Horses had given me an opportunity to mention it, you will win absolutely no prizes whatsoever for working out who I got to sit down with yesterday. You can probably tell from my voice I'm thinking about my dad as I tell you this, because Only Fools and Horses and later A Touch of Frost and Open All Hours. Isn't that weird? 3 shows there, all starring the same man, but all shows that you'd sit and watch together. All 4 of you, all 5 of you, however many people in your family, all 2 of you, all 3 of you, whatever the age is, shows that you would sit down, and I'm not being an old git, I'm not indulging in my dayitis. I'm as fond of a box set as the next man. But that's why David Jason holds such a special place, I think, in the public affection. It is because that when we think of him, we think of family. That's an extraordinary achievement for an entertainer. You think of him and you think of watching the shows with the people that you loved most in the world. And I think it's important when I say things like that to acknowledge that not everybody had a happy childhood or a happy family life. And I love you and I feel sorry for you. I really do. And I hope things have got better since. But for those of us who did, for those of us who look back upon our childhoods with great warmth and happiness and think of our parents with great love and joy, something about David Jason, I would argue, unique. Don't worry, I didn't do any of this during the interview. The poor fellow wouldn't have known where to put himself. But looking back and wondering why I felt so special about that interview, that's why. That's exactly why. Because I couldn't work out why on the way home I was missing my dad so much. And I suddenly realised I wanted to ring him and tell him, I've just sat down with Jack Frost. I've just sat down with Pa Larkin. I've just sat down with Del Boy. And to have that, Scully, and my dad loved the Tom Sharp novels, Porterhouse Blue, and of course David played that character as well, and that is, I hope it comes across. I've got a really good feeling about it. I think it might be one of the all-time greats, one of the absolute humdingers, and I think that he enjoyed it as much as almost. Let's not get carried away. I think that Sir David, to you, Keith, I think that he enjoyed it almost as much as I did. I think that's out on Friday, but I'll give you a heads up because I'm recording 3 this week and I'm not quite sure what the schedule is. But it was to mark the publication of his new book this time next year, which is a really, really lovely read. You can tell I'm quite a fan. But we never really invite anyone on to Full Disclosure that I'm not a fan of, and I've never ended an interview by being less of a fan than I was at the beginning. It's probably because I'm such a soft touch. Aggie, Chippenham, Stag Do's. What made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm from Poland, and in Poland as well, there was no. I mean, there are Stag Do's, but not in such an extent like we just were about to happen. And I was working, it was 2004 or 5, just after EU joined the EU.
Yes.
And so I was working in the cafe. I was studying and working. I remember it must have been Saturday or Sunday, very early morning, because we're opening the cafe, completely empty streets. And all of a sudden, we can see with my friends this bunch of Smurfs coming towards us. But not only, it's like a, that kind of like apocalyptic view. You don't know what to do.
Yes.
Because the Smurfs are drunk, but they're just everywhere. And
How many Smurfs, Aggie?
I think it was kind of around 20 Smurfs, but they were all approaching like kind of from all directions, but they were wobbly as well.
Yeah.
It was just so weird. We honestly we didn't know what to make out of it. Obviously, it was very funny at the start. It wasn't that funny when these groups were just, appearing more and more. Not this Smurf.
The Smurfs were
came and
fine.
went.
The Smurfs behaved themselves. Did they stop? Did they stop in the cafe or anything like that, or did they just walk on by?
I'm not sure if there were any state to do anything, that makes sense.
Incredibly drunk Smurfs. I feel that I should have a punchline ready for this. What do you call a drunk Smurf? I can't think of anything. But, I love that. And they were wearing full costumes, their heads as well and everything.
Yeah, everything. But also they had, some of the Smurfs were smoking, some of them were just really stumbling, and it was just so... we never seen anything like it. And I just have to say that in Poland we've got this kind of city police. So you just cannot be drunk and disorderly on the street.
Really?
You just don't do it. You don't. It is trouble. They very quickly they'll you've got your ID card. They will write your hefty fine. So you just don't do it.
No.
So it was it was strange. It was funny. It was. What is going on? Yeah, we just really didn't know what to make out of it.
It was the tip of a very. It was the amusing tip of what turned out to be a very ugly iceberg.
Yes, exactly. But at that particular moment, we honestly we had no idea what is happening, and I will never forget it.
No, I love that. Well, actually, you've made me think. I've done this hour the wrong way round, Aggie. We should have we should have celebrated it in a way with a side order of the sadness and the bad behaviour. But we could have celebrated the imagination and the creativity of British stag do's, and the day that Aggie opened her door in Poland to see 20 drunk British Smurfs running past. That's the stuff of a John Sullivan comedy. That's the stuff of the Jolly Boys outing in Only Fools and Horses. That was lovely. 12:57 is the time. So here's the missing word round. And Sheila Fogarty has joined me in the studio. We may canvass her opinion on this one. I've always found this a peculiarly obnoxious phrase. So BBC chief bans blank as a term for presenters after controversies.
Talent, and he's right.
It's just outrageous.
He's right. I always felt like a bit of a,
yes,
woman of the night when I was described like that.
Okay.
Yeah,
No,
I hated
crikey.
being described as talent.
Oh, you've knitted two topics together
There
there,
you go.
very neatly. The
woman of the night.
Yes, the stag nights and the... no, so you describe the presenter as the talent.
And the producers have no talent.
What does that make everybody else?
Editors, yeah.
What does that make Keith?
Well, Keith, what can I say?
That's probably fair in his case. But Eleanor should equally be described as the talent.
Yeah.
But maybe we
talented.
Should we not have a word that's one notch down from talent?
No.
No, okay, just checking. That's it from me for another day. This is The Talent, checking out for the final time on the James O'Brien Experience. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player. It was true. People used to say it's the talent. Can you go and talk to the talent? And you sit there and you go, that's just disgusting behaviour. Not least because I wouldn't know how to operate any of the machines in this room, let alone get a show out single-handedly.
It also encourages ludicrous behaviour in said talent.
Does?
I've seen it.
Well, that's the reason. That's one of the reasons they've got rid of the word, because of the recent controversies.
Yeah. But not even behaviour of that seriousness,
no, just
but just idiocy.
Devious behaviour. Fetch me a sandwich. That kind of thing. You can also pause and rewind live radio on Global Player, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. So with thanks to all the talent working on the show today, I remind you that Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4. But now it's even more talented.
Yeah. I do have an ongoing joke with Tom, or Tech Up. That he's my walker. Joan Collins says she has men who walk her from A to B in different places. So Tom is my walker.
Yes, well, we like that.
Because never forget, Tom, I'm the talent.
James O'Brien on LBC.